Light snow was falling outside the city, the coffee shop was closed, and an employee cheerfully waved goodbye to the owner. "Have a good evening." She looked at her phone, which showed an incoming call from Jung Eun Gyo. He had called her several times that day, and each time she was too scared to pick up. Choi Yumi sighed, deciding she needed to go home and rest. To escape the incessant calls and her persistent headache, she chose to continue ignoring him to avoid ruining her mood. A black luxury car pulled up in front of the shop, and two bodyguards stood by the door as it opened. A young man stepped out of the car, casually putting his hands in his pockets as his eyes scanned the shop. The door chime rang, signaling someone's entry. Without turning around, she called out loudly that the shop was closed. When she looked up, she froze. Director Jung Eun Gyo stood right in front of her, his bodyguards blocking the door. He quickly advanced towards her. Choi Yumi, slightly startled, asked him what he was doing in her coffee shop so late, but he only moved closer to her face, observing her intently. Jung Eun Gyo glared at her for a few seconds. Then he asked how long he was supposed to ignore this. She broke out in a cold sweat, a flicker of anger rising within her. Fearing he really knew about her condition, Choi Yumi turned away speechless, and Jung Eun Gyo smirked. He said she must have missed what was happening while he was on a business trip abroad, and she silently prayed he didn't know the truth. She tried to change the subject, saying that if he was there to confirm his attendance for the upcoming meeting, she would let Cha know. Unable to stand being treated like a fool, he looked at her threateningly. He pointed right at her and said he was here to talk about the baby in her womb. Choi Yumi was stunned and stumbled forward, but he managed to catch her. With a trembling voice, she asked how he knew. Jung Eun Gyo asked if she had slept with another man after he left the country. Stunned, she asked what he was talking about. He placed his palm on her belly and asked if it was his child. Choi Yumi bit her lower lip, thinking how cruel and vicious he was. She took a deep breath and said the baby wasn't his, and that she didn't even know who the father was, because after their breakup, she had been with many other men. Jung Eun Gyo watched her intently, saying she was trying to provoke and mock him. He said that if she dared to lie, the consequences would be severe, even for someone of her standing. She turned away, saying he had the wrong idea about her, and that who the father of her baby was had nothing to do with him. Whether to keep the baby or not was her right, and she told him to go and leave her alone. Jung Eun Gyo stood in silence for a moment, then suddenly grabbed her arm, telling her to stop with the nonsense and come with him. A moment later, she was rather forcefully pushed inside the car. She started screaming, angrily asking what he planned to do with her. Leaning against the car door, he bent down and told her not to worry. He wouldn't harm the woman who was carrying his child. Choi Yumi choked on the smell of cigarette smoke. She covered her nose, feeling nauseous. Jung Eun Gyo realized the cigarette smoke was bothering her, and immediately threw it on the ground. He stamped it out with his shoe and offered her a handkerchief. Then he got into the car. Choi Yumi placed a hand on her belly and said that once the baby was born, she wouldn't ask him for anything or demand he take any responsibility. Jung Eun Gyo smirked. He said he never mentioned marrying her, then turned to his driver and told him to buy some food suitable for a pregnant woman. Surprised, she looked at him and said that wasn't necessary. He ignored her and gently stroked her head. He told her to calm down, close her eyes, and rest as he covered them. She thought about the heavy price she had paid for one night with him. If only they had never met in the first place. The first time they met, he'd asked if she was willing to play with fire. At the time, she wondered if their meeting was a coincidence or destiny. Now, she could confirm it was most likely destiny that brought them together. It all began a few weeks earlier, when Choi Yumi and Jung Eun Gyo met on a blind date arranged by her parents. She looked at the man across from her and thought he had a lot of nerve to show up 3 hours late. Wait, why would she even wait for a guy for 3 hours? That's just me wondering, by the way. She wondered what the point of having dinner so late even was. His eyes were completely blank, showing no interest whatsoever. Jung Eun Gyo was the representative and heir to Gusung, South Korea's largest gang. She was surprised he'd come to a date looking like he was ready for a brawl, bringing a whole crew of his men along. Choi Yumi took a sip of wine, thinking that if he hadn't shown up at all, she could have just told her father she'd waited for him. But he never came, and then she could refuse to see him again. She offered him a taste of her wine, saying it was pretty good. He rudely cut her off, saying she must have been drinking for a while now. She stared at him, bewildered. Jung Eun Gyo glared, saying he'd given her plenty of time to escape and asked if she was that eager to play with fire. Choi Yumi reminded him they had met a few days prior at a dinner party. Her father had brought her to that event, where they met Jung Eun Gyo, and she had thought it would be the first and last time they'd see each other. She explained that since her father was also a gangster, she could never dream of having a normal marriage. She couldn't defy her father's will, so it was best to just obey and not anger him. Jung Eun Gyo took out a cigarette and took a drag. He smirked, asking if she thought getting married would get her out of being obedient. She quickly waved her hands, saying he misunderstood. She knew he didn't want to be there either, so she would tell her father that he'd rejected her, and that would be the end of it. He exhaled a cloud of smoke, saying he didn't think things were that simple. Choi Yumi sighed and formally introduced herself. She was 28, had a bachelor's degree, and owned the Bancha coffee shop. Then she stood up, saying that now that he knew the basics, then she would be leaving. But she stopped short when she heard his voice. He calmly asked why she was leaving. She asked what the point of telling him about herself was if he wasn't interested, especially since they'd never meet again. Jung Eun Gyo's expression remained unchanged as he flicked his ash onto the lobster plate, calmly replying that whether they met again wasn't her decision to make. Trying to maintain her composure, Choi Yumi hastily said she was leaving. She said that she'd had a pleasant time and realized Jung Eun Gyo was right, that she had no say in the matter, but she hoped he was just trying to provoke her. Suddenly, he signaled his underlings. He turned to his driver, told him to leave, and said that he would drive himself. She stared, confused about what was going on. She asked what he was doing, and he replied that he would take her home. Choi Yumi tried to protest. She followed, saying he didn't have to take her, but he walked on nonchalantly, saying she'd just told him she'd had a pleasant time. So why not make it last a little longer? She followed in silence, thinking how strange he was for insisting on taking her home. After making her wait for 3 hours, once they were outside, she tried again, insisting she could take a taxi home by herself. Dong Hyung coldly asked if she needed him to open the door for her, and she realized he wasn't going to listen. She sighed and obediently got in. In the car, she felt extremely uncomfortable and told him to stop in front of her building. Looking at him, she thought that even if her father ordered it, she didn't want to be on a blind date with a gangster. She closed her eyes and sighed. A gangster's daughter could only dream of a normal relationship. Love was out of the question, a complete fantasy. Jung Eun Gyo watched Choi Yumi intently, noticing her discomfort. She looked down at her phone sadly. She read a friend's text message saying her ex-boyfriend was getting married. The next morning, Choi Yumi was making coffee while on the phone with her mother. Her mother wanted her to visit, but she said she had a lot of work and plans for the weekend. Her mother grumbled that all her daughter did was make coffee while everyone else was getting married and having babies. Choi Yumi replied that was precisely why she had gone on the blind date. Hearing that, her mom complained she'd had more than enough with her own gangster husband. She couldn't understand why he'd want a gangster son-in-law. Yumi wearily rubbed her forehead, reassuring her mom that nothing would happen with that man, so not to worry. Suddenly, she heard the door chime and told her mom she had to get back to her customers. A strange man appeared, ordered a latte without looking up. Nothing will ever happen, so don't worry. Suddenly, she heard the door chime. Yoon-do recognized him and told her boss that the guy comes in every day and acts really weird. The employee explained that he always sits at the table facing the counter and just stares at Jumi. She took a closer look and became cautious. Yoon-do recognized him and told her boss that the guy comes in every day and acts really weird. After some thought, she mustered up the courage to go. A few hours later, she was at the wedding venue, where the bride and groom were cheerfully greeting their guests. Choi Yumi said not to jump to conclusions yet, but to just watch him. Then she got a text from Hisoon asking if she was going to the wedding. After some thought, she mustered the courage to go. A few hours later, she was at the wedding hall, where the bride and groom were happily greeting guests. Jumi's friend crossed her arms, saying the bride was a hypocrite for stealing someone else's lover and still being happy. Choi Yumi held her head high and said that Jung Hyung was never her man. So you don't have to worry for me, but Hisan was still upset, saying everyone knew he loved Yumi. She said Yumi's problem is always trying to rationalize everything, while her so-called best friend stole her boyfriend. It's disgusting. Secondly, Hisan said she didn't believe Jumi would come to the wedding until the last minute. She replied that if she didn't come, everyone would think she was hurt and jealous, and she didn't want unnecessary rumors. She wanted to see for herself that he was happy with another woman, so now she could let go without regrets. She took a sip of wine, feeling more relieved. Hisan smiled and told her to forget that bastard, and said she could introduce her to someone interesting. Choi Yumi took another sip, mentioning she'd recently been on a blind date. It was arranged by her father, but it went quite well. Suddenly, she felt someone's eyes on her. Looking around, she saw the strange man who had been at their cafe. But when their eyes met, he quickly looked away. A chill ran down her spine, making her shiver. Could Eunju be right? Was he stalking her? She thought about approaching him, but then figured she might just be paranoid. It was probably just her ex's wedding making her paranoid. As Jumi walked home slowly, she heard footsteps echoing behind her. Choi Yumi turned around but saw no one. She thought she heard something, but it must be her imagination. This feeling wasn't new, as her father's rival once hired someone to follow her in college. It was fine back then, but now the feeling was back. Was it just her overactive imagination? Especially with recent events, she walked to a parked car on the side of the road and looked into the rear-view mirror. To her horror, she saw the reflection of that man right behind her. Her blood ran cold, her mind racing for a way to react. Just then, a familiar voice called her name. She whipped around. Her mother stood there, startled, asking why she looked so terrified. Before she could answer, her mom scolded her for not picking up her phone and for being out alone so late. Choi Yumi asked her mother why she was out so late. She replied she had something urgent to discuss and urged her to go inside quickly. She glanced around, but the man was gone. Inside the cozy apartment, her mother asked how the recent blind date went. Choi Yumi sighed wearily, asking how many more blind dates she had to go on and saying none of them were working out. Surprisingly, her mother nodded, said that was good, and revealed she had already arranged another blind date. Surprisingly, her mother nodded, said that was good, and revealed she had already arranged another blind date. The eldest son of the Hiseong hospital director is a very good man. she even said. Her father should have introduced him first, instead of that gangster. Choi Yumi groaned that her mother was playing a broken record. Her mother lamented that she was tired of her gangster husband and didn't want to worry about a gangster son-in-law as well. She was furious that he would use their only daughter as a pawn for his business. She was so upset she spilled tea on herself. She asked if her mother would be happy if people gossiped that she was the mother-in-law of the hospital director's son. She rubbed her temples, asking what her mom would do if her dad found out. Her mom said if her daughter and the director's son fell in love, her dad couldn't do anything, and at worst, they could elope. If they fell in love, her father couldn't do anything, and at least they could elope together. Her mother checked the time, said it was late and she had to leave. Exhausted from a long day, Choi Yumi got into bed and quickly fell asleep. A few days later, she was at the same hotel where she used to date Jung Eun Gyo. She sat down, feeling incredibly awkward. Returning to this place again, having a new date in the same spot, felt both strange and wrong to her. A handsome young man handed her a business card and introduced himself as Lee Taeju. He said he'd heard a lot about her and was pleased to meet her. His expression was sincere and open, and she realized he was here for a reason. Choi Yumi thought about how her mother wanted an alliance with the hospital director, while this man's father wanted her dad's money for his business. This blind date was just like the last one. He wanted to grow his business with her father's money, making this blind date no different from the last one. But he didn't cross any lines. They began a pleasant conversation. She thought that compared to Jung Eun Gyo, this man was much more natural and friendly. She suddenly wondered why she was even thinking of him at a time like this. She concluded it was just because she was in the same place that she was reminded of him. He continued to talk about himself non-stop. At some point, Choi Yumi started to feel bored and decided to finish her coffee and end the date. He continued to talk about himself non-stop. At some point, Choi Yumi started to feel bored and decided to finish her coffee and end the date. Lost in thought, she didn't realize Lee Taeju had called her name a few times. Suddenly, her eyes landed on a familiar figure. Jung Eun Gyo entered the hotel lobby and was immediately surrounded by staff. She froze, her mother's warning echoing in her mind that her father must not know about this date, as it concerned her future happiness. What was she to do now? She froze, her mother's warning ringing in her ears that her father must not know about this date because it was about her happiness. He walked closer, his eyes locked on hers. She braced herself for a public humiliation, but he walked right past her. She sat frozen, her father was walking behind him. He just glanced back at her meaningfully and cleared his throat. An indescribable mix of shock and relief made her lower her head in exhaustion. But he walked right past her. She sat frozen. Her father was walking behind him. But for some reason, her heart pounded as if she'd been caught cheating. She owed him nothing. Lee Taeju asked if she was feeling unwell. She panted and said she was fine. She knew she had done nothing wrong. But for some reason, her heart pounded as if she'd been caught cheating. She owed him nothing. At worst, her father would scold her for going on a blind date without permission. Choi Yumi wondered why he was here and what he would say. Just as she expected, her father texted, telling her to come see him immediately. She shot up from her seat, apologized, and said she had to go. A confused Lee Taeju asked what was wrong, then said he'd call her later and hoped to see her again. Choi Yumi smiled, wished him luck, and rushed off. As she walked down the hotel corridor, she wondered how things had gotten so complicated. Suddenly, she distinctly felt someone behind her, and a chill ran down her spine. She felt someone's breath on her neck and froze in terror. Her phone clattered to the floor. Clutching her chest in panic, she collapsed to the floor in confusion. She wondered if the man who'd been stalking her had finally caught up. Then, Jumi ran as fast as she could until she saw Director Young's men and breathed a sigh of relief. The bodyguard opened the door and announced her. She saw Jung Eun Gyo at the table, with her father fawning over him and pouring him wine. Seeing his daughter, he beckoned for her to join them. She sat down, but couldn't shake the thought of how close her stalker had gotten. Her father laughed awkwardly, apologized for interrupting her intimate dinner, and offered her a glass of wine. Choi Yumi wasn't listening to her father, lost in thought about the strange man following her. First at the cafe, then the wedding, and now this hotel. This couldn't be a coincidence. Her father was a strict man who demanded absolute obedience from his daughter. Choi Yumi wasn't listening to her father. Her mind was on the strange man, stalking her, first at the cafe, then at the wedding, and now in this hotel. She was pulled from her thoughts by her father's irritated question. Looking up, she apologized and asked him to repeat it as she raised her glass. So when she wanted to be independent, he threatened her that if she ever dared to complain about any difficulties or problems. Seeing a chance to get away from him, she cheerfully said they were very close, but then she saw her father was about to explode. She quickly explained they had just run into each other and decided to have dinner. She asked him how he'd been, saying she was just about to call him. Perhaps it was too early to say, so she thought it best to wait. She was pulled from her thoughts. He offered to pour her more wine, and she accepted. Unexpectedly, he said that she had told him she'd had a pleasant evening with him last time. She stared at him in confusion. He continued filling her glass and added that it seemed she had been having many interesting meetings. Hearing the hidden meaning in his voice, her father forced a laugh and said his daughter was very reserved. She quickly explained that she just happened to run into him, and they decided to have dinner. She asked him how he'd been lately, and said she was just about to call him the other day. He smiled, a small dimple appearing on his cheek. Choi Yumi was surprised. His face was always so serious and cold, it was hard to imagine he had a dimple. He offered to pour her more wine, and she happily accepted. Suddenly, he said that she had told him she had a fun evening with him last time. She looked at him, bewildered. He continued to fill her glass and added that it seemed she had a lot of interesting encounters. Hearing the hidden meaning in his voice, her father forced a laugh and said his daughter was very reserved. Cautious and rarely going out, Jung Eun Gyo stubbed out his cigarette, retorting that he didn't think so. He stood up, left the table, and headed for the door. Her father looked at his daughter and sternly told her to follow Director Jung. Soon, they left the hotel, walking side by side. Her father, feeling extremely uncomfortable, said he would go home on his own. Hearing this, he turned to his daughter, his gaze icy, a clear warning of a serious talk to come. Jung Eun Gyo's car pulled up, and everyone bowed goodbye, wishing Director Jung a safe journey. She sighed heavily, thinking that just because she went on a blind date at her mother's request without asking for permission, her father had gotten himself into big trouble. Suddenly, the back window rolled down, and Jung Eun Gyo offered her a ride, saying he was about to leave too. Choi Yumi was stunned. Her father and the director's men were just as surprised. Without waiting for her reply, he sighed softly and said it seemed like she didn't want to come along. With her father standing nearby, his words snapped her back to reality. She practically lunged for the car, desperately asking for a ride. She gripped the door handle, desperately asking if he could drop her off at the same place as before. Their eyes met. She was pleading. He was cold. He read her like an open book, understanding that by taking her with him, he was saving her from her father's fury. The car sped through the streets in the night. Choi Yumi coughed lightly, shyly thanking him for the ride. He let out a soft chuckle. He said she should have been more polite to him. She thanked him sincerely again, wondering to herself why he had helped her. Could he be drunk after just a few glasses of whiskey? Suddenly, she realized he was staring at her, but his face was completely expressionless. His gaze wasn't friendly, but it wasn't hostile either, which only made her more curious. Mustering up her courage, she asked why he was helping her. He smirked, replying that he wasn't even aware he was helping her. But she knew he was lying. She knew he had guessed she was afraid of being caught and wasn't happy about the date. Without thinking, she blurted out that he wasn't telling the truth. Jung Eun Gyo smirked, and that familiar dimple appeared again. He thought to himself that this girl wasn't as simple as she appeared. Finally, the car stopped in front of her place. Choi Yumi was about to hurry out of the car to rest, but he suddenly stopped her. When she turned back, he pointed to her dress, which was stuck under his thigh. She awkwardly pulled the fabric free, wondering just how close she had been sitting for her dress to get trapped under him like that. Once it was free, she blushed, thanked him for taking her home, and wished him a good night, then quickly left the car. Choi Yumi started walking up the stairs. Finally, she could breathe normally again. She had felt suffocated by the tension in the car. That man truly frightened her. She let out a sharp breath, remembering she still had to explain things to her father. Suddenly, her phone slipped from her hand, falling onto the stairs nearby. She leaned over the railing to try and grab it, looking down wearily. She thought to herself that today really sucked. A few stairs away, someone was lurking in the shadows above her, but a sudden sixth sense alerted her. It made her look up and notice the light on her floor was out, and she was overcome with a distinct feeling of dread. That someone else was standing in the darkness. Choi Yumi covered her mouth, holding her breath. She was certain someone was lurking above. Fear spread through her body, gripping her tightly. Her mind raced. Should she scream, run, or call the police? Suddenly, her phone lit up, the ringtone of an incoming call echoing. She froze for a few seconds. She thought the stalker would attack her right away, since she was alone on the deserted staircase without her phone. Finally, she decided to take the risk. She bolted down the stairs, silently thanking her mother for calling at the perfect time. Leaping down several steps, she snatched her phone and ran for her life, not daring to look back. When she saw the main door ahead, her lungs burned for air and tears streamed from her eyes, but salvation was at hand. Stepping outside, she had only one thought: find someone to ask for help. Suddenly, she saw Jung Eun Gyo's car was still parked out front. She ran to the car, banging on the window and frantically begging for help. He opened the door, stepped out, and watched her intently. Trying to hold back tears, she began to explain that someone was waiting for her outside her apartment, and that this person had been following her for several days. She'd been feeling uneasy. She gripped the lapels of his coat as tears streamed down her face. She confessed she had seen the man at a nearby cafe and hotel as she stammered on about the stalker. Jung Eun Gyo listened intently, realizing how terrified she was. Confused, a sudden wave of anger surged through him. At the thought that she could have been in danger, he grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the building. Panicked, she fearfully asked, "What are you doing?" His large hand held hers firmly, making her feel surprisingly safe with him by her side. He said he would take her home and check on things. Looking down at their intertwined hands, her breathing steadied a bit. Jung Eun Gyo walked in first with an air of confidence. He carefully scanned the area while she waited nervously by the door. Finally, he turned back to her and asked, "Does your fire alarm system always look like this?" She looked at him blankly, not understanding his question. Strangely, Jung Eun Gyo stood nearby, his gaze fixed on the fire alarm device. In the corner opposite the door, she looked closer and realized it wasn't a fire alarm, because the real one was installed to the right. It was a hidden camera. With his height, he easily reached up to the fake device and pulled it down. He was right. It was a CCTV camera. He examined it and said the camera had been installed either yesterday or today. He didn't find anything else suspicious inside the apartment. Hearing this, Choi Yumi guessed the stalker probably knew her door password. He nodded in confirmation. The thought that the man could have been inside her apartment that night made her shudder. She reached for her phone, muttering that she needed to call the police. Suddenly, the phone slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor. She was too frightened to even hold it. Jung Gyo picked it up but didn't hand it back right away. She pleaded for it back, but he suddenly squeezed the phone, snapping it in half with a loud crack. Her eyes widened in horror, and she screamed, asking why he would do that. She suspected he did it because she mentioned the police in front of a gangster, but he just snapped that he'd never heard anything so stupid in his life. Angrily, Choi Yumi told him to get out of her house, but then she changed her mind and took it back. He said he'd never heard anything so stupid in his life. Angrily, Choi Yumi told him to get out of her house, but then she changed her mind and took it back. Jung Eun Gyo turned back, annoyed, asking who she thought was stalking her. He looked her straight in the eye, asserting that no matter who it was, her father was powerful and she would be protected. Too shocked to understand, Choi Yumi asked what he meant. He sighed in frustration and asked if she had a habit of asking the same questions repeatedly. He asserted that no matter who it was, her father was powerful, so she would be protected. She couldn't let that happen. Her face went pale as she stammered incoherently. Jung Eun Gyo smirked triumphantly. With that, he threw the broken phone behind him. She bent down to pick up the pieces, glaring at him furiously. Jung Eun Gyo called his men and ordered them to find the guy stalking Choi Yumi. He said the man must still be nearby. He couldn't have gotten far after what just happened. He leaned toward her, asking where she last saw him and if she remembered any nearby landmarks. Jung Eun Gyo called his men and ordered them to find the guy stalking Choi Yumi. He said the man must still be nearby. He couldn't have gotten far after what just happened. He leaned toward her, asking about the last time. His eyes blazed with determination and cold fury as he said to catch the man alive and bring him to him. She handed him a small piece of paper with some notes. He relayed all the information to his subordinate and told him to report immediately if they found him. Staring at her intently, he suddenly handed the note back. She looked at him in surprise. Alive, bring him to me. Choi Yumi, who had been sitting on the floor the whole time, heard the entire conversation. But when she realized he was about to leave, she quickly grabbed his coat, her eyes pleadingly asking if he was really going to leave her alone. Jung Eun Gyo turned back to look at her, not understanding why he had to stay and watch over her. He put his hands in his jacket pockets, saying he didn't like this kind of cheap flirtation. She looked at him desperately, saying she wasn't trying to seduce him, just that she was genuinely afraid the stalker would return to attack. Choi Yumi began to wipe away her tears. The unbidden thought came to her that she couldn't believe she considered this man safer than the stalker. Her pleading eyes asked if he was really going to leave her alone. Jung Eun Gyo turned back to look at her. Not understanding why he had to stay and watch her, he put his hands in his jacket pockets, saying he didn't like this kind of cheap flirtation. She looked at him desperately, saying she wasn't trying to seduce him, just that she was genuinely afraid the stalker would return to attack. Choi Yumi began to wipe away her tears. The unbidden thought came to her that she couldn't believe she considered this man safer than the stalker. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh and walked to the fridge. Confused, she asked what he was doing. He took out a bottle of wine and poured it straight into a glass. Then, he handed it to her and told her to drink it. Jung Eun Gyo crossed his arms, watching with satisfaction as she drained the glass. To his surprise, she finished it in a few gulps, wiped her mouth with her sleeve, and held out the glass for more. He was quite surprised by her action, but still reached for the bottle. Choi Yumi quietly apologized for causing him trouble, and she told him not to tell her father about this. He watched her silently with interest, wondering about her relationship with her father. Why was she so afraid of him? Without saying anything else, he refilled her glass. She looked up at him. In a pleading voice, she asked him to stay with her until the bottle was finished, saying only then could she calm down enough to sleep. Her voice was filled with sincerity. Jung Eun Gyo asked in surprise why he should agree when all she ever did was annoy him. She bowed her head, admitting she was genuinely scared. Seeing him hesitate, she pleaded that since he'd already helped, he could stay a bit longer. So what? He asked irritably if she thought he had nothing better to do. She said that since he didn't let her call the police, he was now responsible for protecting her. Surprised by her claim, he said she was demanding too much for someone in her position. Suddenly, Choi Yumi wrapped her arms around herself, trembling as she confessed she was truly terrified. Because this wasn't the first time this had happened, her miserable state made his resolve waver. He exhaled sharply and asked if she thought that he was more dangerous than the stalker. Choi Yumi said she knew he was a bad guy, but at least he was a familiar one, and she felt safer because he was close with her father. He was taken aback by this confession. He said that kind of carelessness was dangerous, then turned away with a heavy sigh, replying that he would stay until she finished her drink. She silently stared into her wine glass. Before long, Choi Yumi was dead drunk. Trying to get the last drops from the bottle, which wasn't her first tonight, she was already sprawled out on the sofa. Mumbling, she repeated what she'd said on her first date with Jung Eun Gyo, asking who he thought he was. Who was he to allow or forbid her from doing anything? She asked what right he had to interfere, but he couldn't believe he was in this situation. Deciding it was time to end this mess, he lifted her with both hands. Intending to carry her to the bedroom, she resisted and even threatened him. Faced with her defiance, he lowered his voice to threaten her. He threatened to strip her naked and throw her into the street to sober up. She just smirked. She told him to go ahead and do it if he wasn't ashamed. Suddenly, she fell silent, resting her head on his chest as thoughts swirled in her mind. She regretted going to her ex's wedding. Although she'd said she didn't care, she had been in pain for the past 28 years. She had never made a single decision for herself, not even who to love, a right that everyone should have. Still clutching his jacket lapel, she cried, saying that nothing ever went the way she wanted. He coughed politely, telling her not to say things she might regret later. She hugged him. She cried out in desperation that her whole life was full of regrets, and she didn't want to have any more. Suddenly, she became aware of his slow, strong heartbeat. His warm, solid chest made her feel safe. This peacefulness made her close her eyes and savor the moment. Then she suddenly looked up at his broad chest. He realized she was about to lose control and told her to get a hold of herself. His phone rang, forcing him to let go of her to answer. Choi Yumi seized the opportunity to wrap both her arms around his waist. Pressing against him to stay balanced, he answered the phone saying it wasn't a good time to talk. She looked up, her face beaming. She was amused by his struggle to stay calm, as his expression was always so stoic. It made her wonder if he could show any other emotion. She wanted to rip off that icy mask of his. Noticing her staring, he irritably asked why. She suddenly pulled back and smiled. She replied that his expression could change after all. She'd finally seen a new emotion on Jung Eun Gyo. Realizing she was out of control and about to cross the line, he stood up, said he had to leave, and told her to lock the door properly. He was surprised when Choi Yumi grabbed his sleeve, clinging to his arm and saying she was truly grateful for his help. He paused, allowing her to press her cheek to his chest. She repeated her thanks over and over, as if suddenly stuck in a loop. Feeling the warmth radiating from him again, she raised her hand to gently stroke his cheek, feeling the same warmth she had with her ex. She continued to caress him gently, thinking that she deserved this warmth too, that she shouldn't let go of what was hers or let her father or anyone else decide for her. Then, she looked up with tear-filled eyes, begging him not to go. Before he could react, she gently traced his lips with her finger and slowly leaned in. Finding his lips, she decided she wouldn't let go of the warmth she felt from him. The room fell silent as the man and woman kissed on the floor. Choi Yumi wrapped her arms around his neck. Giving him a passionate kiss, Jung Eun Gyo traced her lips with his finger and asked why she was being so reckless with him. She let out a strange little sound, and he smirked slyly when he heard it. Choi Yumi climbed onto his lap. He held her face in his hands, his body tensing as he said he wouldn't fall for such cheap tricks, and asked what she was trying to get. Jung Eun Gyo clenched his jaw, trying to restrain himself. He thought he must be an idiot to be tempted by a trick like this. Suddenly, she reached for her ankle, saying she'd sprained it running from the stalker. He took her foot, pulling her closer. As he stretched out her leg to make her more comfortable, Choi Yumi wrapped her arms around his neck, smirked, and whispered it was the other leg, telling him to hurry up. As he stretched out her leg to make her more comfortable, Choi Yumi wrapped her arms around his neck, smirking and whispering that it was the leg. His willpower crumbled. He growled that if she wanted it that badly, they would just call it a drunken impulse on both their parts. He hastily loosened his tie, throwing it aside, then ran his hands through his hair. Trying to soothe his conscience, he told himself they were both drunk and this was just a moment of impulse. Trying to soothe his conscience, he told himself they were both drunk, and this was just a moment of impulse. He gently caressed her face, starting to cover it with light, fleeting kisses. Choi Yumi pressed closer, savoring his warmth. Jung Eun Gyo grew more intoxicated with every breath. She leaned back, her eyes burning as she told him not to stop. They both decided tonight would be a small adventure that they would quickly forget by tomorrow. A passionate night ignited between the two of them. For those who want the details, you'll have to read the book, because I can't narrate those scenes here. The next morning, Jung Eun Gyo was waiting for an elevator in his office building. His subordinate called, reporting that he'd found the guy from yesterday and had done exactly as instructed. The man was about to ask about last night, but the elevator chimed and the doors opened, revealing a beautiful young woman inside. Upon seeing Jung Eun Gyo, she said that if she'd known he was in the office today, she would have stayed longer. She gave him a flirtatious look, saying that coffee and wine are much better when you have them with someone. He walked past her without responding to the flirtation. She was hitting on the wrong guy. Cheap tricks don't work on Director Jung. Only a nine-tailed fox like Choi Yumi could conquer him. As he was about to step into the elevator, he indifferently said it was nice to meet her and wished her all the best. Offended, she stood frozen to the spot. The two men in the elevator were silent after that awkward encounter. Jung Eun Gyo asked for a name. The bodyguard looked at the director, bewildered. He glared angrily, demanding his subordinate tell him the name of the man who had been following her. The chairman warmly welcomed Jung Eun Gyo. Director Jung sat down on the sofa. He remarked that despite being busy, the chairman still visited him often. The chairman smiled kindly. He asked Director Jung if he'd seen his wife on his way in, as she had just left the office. Jung Eun Gyo gave a slight nod. The chairman got straight to the point, immediately asking if he liked Director Choi's daughter. He said that, even though he had arranged the blind date for them, he still wanted Jung Eun Gyo to truly love his future wife. He knew the chairman always treated him like a son, but this sudden unreasonable request was strange. And then there was the newlywed third wife, Miss Song Hang. After the party the other day, the chairman's third wife was infatuatedly gazing at the young adopted son. The chairman called him for a meeting and said it was time for his successor to get married, and to make that happen, he had arranged a meeting. They had met for lunch a few days ago. Jumi is the only daughter of Director Choi. He holds power through investment shares. If they become in-laws, they would be family, and it would be good for business. He looked at the young man, asking if he thought the same. Jung Eun Gyo realized the old man's words made sense, but even if he objected, his opinion in this matter held little value. He listened in silence, thinking that love was too dangerous and fragile. A gentle breeze was enough to blow it to dust. Even the once cold and ruthless chairman had now softened. He was no longer the decisive man of absolute power he once was. A secretary suddenly appeared and offered to bring him coffee. The chairman enthusiastically agreed, adding that his wife had just made him a very delicious coffee. Seeing how quickly the chairman had changed, he then said he received a call from Japan this morning. A partner wanted him to take on a new project. Meanwhile, Choi Yumi was working at the cafe when Eunju suddenly asked if she was okay because she looked pale. She admitted she drank too much last night. Eunju suggested she have lemon tea instead of coffee, and she nodded thankfully. Her head felt like it was about to explode. Her memories of last night were fragmented, but she clearly remembered Jung Eun Gyo's face, and what they did was unmistakable. The truth hit her like a lightning bolt. She couldn't believe her first time was with a guy she'd only met a few times, and while she was dead drunk, her face flushed with shame. Eunju asked if she had a fever, but she quickly waved her hands dismissively. Suddenly, a staff member noticed that the strange guy hadn't shown up today. Choi Yumi paused, wondering if Director Jung would keep his promise and find that guy. She wondered if it was right to trust him like that. The doorbell chimed cheerfully. Hyunseong walked in with a smile, but seeing her friend's miserable state, she asked playfully, "Who did you drink with last night to look like this?" She crossed her arms, teasing if she'd accidentally spent the night with a stranger. Choi Yumi almost collapsed because the comment was too accurate, only replying that she needed more coffee. Hiseo then asked if she was okay. Worried because she'd called so many times with no answer, she explained her phone was broken. Her friend cupped her own cheeks, exclaiming that Yumi getting drunk and breaking her phone again was a classic. Worried because she kept calling but her friend didn't pick up, she said her phone was broken. Her friend placed a hand on her cheek. Their names are kind of similar, so I'm just making a note so people don't get confused. Hearing that, Jumi was stunned. Hyunseong suddenly announced she just heard that Yumi's ex got married to the homewrecker, who is now pregnant. So this news was a real shock. Hisong felt bad for bringing it up and quickly asked if she was okay. Of course, everything suddenly became clear. Usually, a couple only thinks about having kids after the wedding. So this news was a real shock. Hisong felt bad for bringing it up and quickly asked if she was okay. Because your taste is great, Jumi joked not to flatter her but agreed to go shopping with her friend. Xiong decided to change the subject, begging Jumi to help her pick out decorations for her home renovation. She smiled thankfully but declined, saying she was very tired and wanted to go home to rest. "Thanks for helping me unwind." The two girls cheerfully said their goodbyes, wishing each other a good evening. She smiled thankfully but declined, saying she was very tired and wanted to go home and rest. Honestly, she was happy for her friend. She could clearly sense her friend was very happy for some reason. She didn't want to return to her empty apartment. Suddenly, she took out her phone and started dialing Jung Eun Gyo's number. She felt a bit shy but figured inviting him to dinner as a thank you for his help was a reasonable thing to do. She stood there hesitating, thinking that maybe she should consider moving out. She felt a bit shy but figured inviting him to dinner as a thank you for his help was reasonable. She stood there hesitating, thinking that maybe she should consider moving out, so that the events of the past few days would no longer haunt her whenever she got close to home. She saw a familiar car and was surprised when one of Jung Eun Gyo's men got out and bowed, which startled her. Choi Yumi asked why he was there, her mind racing, wondering why Jung Eun Gyo had sent someone to find her. He said he had something to show her and walked to the trunk. When it opened, she saw a badly beaten and bound man, covering her mouth in horror, not recognizing him at first. She didn't understand why he was showing her this. Then suddenly, under all the bruises, she recognized her stalker from the past few days. Choi Yumi backed away in fear, unable to believe it was real. The henchman started reporting that this guy would come to her cafe on certain days and stay for her entire shift. He was also caught on security cameras at the hotel and her house. She turned away. She had wanted him dealt with, but never imagined it would be like this. This guy would come to her cafe on certain days and stay for her entire shift. The man got in the car, saying the director would make the decision, and then bid her farewell. She stood alone on the street, stunned, watching the car drive away. Suddenly, her head throbbed as she wondered what was happening to her life. She fumbled in her bag for her phone and decided to call Jung Eun Gyo. Although she hadn't intended to call him first, the situation forced her hand. He answered almost instantly, surprised to hear her voice. She stammered that she was calling about the stalker. Annoyed, he told her to make it quick because he was very busy. In a single breath, she desperately asked if he was going to kill the man. Jung Eun Gyo calmly asked if that wasn't the reason she asked for his help. He thought she wanted him to handle the problem permanently. Although she hadn't intended to call him first, the situation forced her hand. He answered almost instantly. She said if she knew it would end like this, she never would have involved him. He got angry, telling her to have the guts to say it to his face. Choi Yumi tried to explain he misunderstood, but he wouldn't listen. He went on, saying she just passed off the responsibility of dealing with the stalker and now feels guilty because he might get killed. But he advised her to think hard about how selfish she was. His words felt like a slap in the face. Before she could reply, he hung up. She stood in the street, realizing what a hypocrite she was. She had acted like a true coward. When she got back to her apartment, she quietly closed the door and slid down against it, letting out a heavy sigh. She never would have involved him. He got angry, telling her to have the guts to say it all to his face. Choi Yumi tried to explain that he misunderstood, but he wouldn't listen. He went on, saying she just easily passed off the responsibility of dealing with the stalker and now feels guilty because he might get killed. But he advised her to think hard about how selfish she was. His words felt like a slap in the face. Before she could reply, he hung up. She stood in the street, realizing what a hypocrite she was. She had acted like a true coward. When she got back to her apartment, she quietly closed the door behind her and slid down. Letting out a heavy sigh, Choi Yumi wearily hung her head. She didn't want things to turn out this way. But feeling like she was being dragged deeper into a mess, she looked up, her eyes landing on the mess from the previous night. Belongings were scattered about. Empty wine bottles littered the area around the sofa, evidence of the previous night's events. She took a deep breath to steady herself, telling herself this was no time to lose heart. She needed to clean the room to clear her head. She tripped on an empty bottle, and as she bent to pick it up, everything came flooding back. It all happened because she was too drunk. What frustrated her most was that she could still clearly remember the feeling, how she had been in that mess. But she couldn't recall his cold expression vanishing. She sighed wearily, pulling herself back to the present. Why was she thinking about that man so often? She wasn't asking for much. She just wanted a normal life like everyone else. But her life had never been normal. In high school, her classmates whispered about her behind her back. Her father was a gangster, so they only cared about her family's money, never about who she truly was. She was always surrounded by people who wanted to use their connection to her for personal gain. Once, during gym class, she got hit in the head by a ball. They hadn't meant to, quickly apologizing and checking on her. But the next day, a boy came to school covered in bruises. He didn't tell anyone what happened, but rumors that her father's men were responsible immediately spread throughout the school. People whispered that since her father was a gangster, it was best not to befriend her to avoid trouble. So she always lived in loneliness. I, Choi Yumi, thought that nothing had changed since then, even though she still dreamed of a peaceful life where she could fall in love, getting married, having children. She plopped down on the sofa, tiredly wondering, why did such normal things seem so out of reach? She placed a hand on her forehead and sighed heavily, thinking about her desire to live as she pleased. And making her own life decisions felt so distant. Suddenly, the phone rang. Suddenly, the phone rang. When he saw her, he smiled brightly and greeted her. Choi Yumi replied, apologizing for not calling him sooner. He asked if he was bothering her so early in the day. She said it was fine. She even said she really had something to discuss. Sitting in a cafe, she told him their last meeting was only at her mother's insistence. She herself wasn't interested in marriage or relationships in general, so she wanted to apologize for wasting his time. She thought to herself that her mother definitely couldn't win this argument against her father, but even if he wanted to marry her off to Jung Eun Gyo, she wouldn't just obediently accept it. Letezu smiled sincerely, thanked her for her honesty, and said, any relationship should be handled directly. Choi Yumi said she would tell her mother that she had been rejected. Suddenly, she remembered saying similar words to Jung Eun Gyo. Letezu smiled sadly and said he had actually planned to ask her on a second date. But it turned out he was the one being rejected. Choi Yumi sincerely apologized for making him feel bad. But it turned out he was the one being rejected. Choi Yumi sincerely apologized for making him feel bad, and said she would treat him to dinner today. Lee Taeju told her not to feel sorry for him. She awkwardly replied that she absolutely didn't mean to offend him. She said that she only came to meet him today to make things clear. Her mother wouldn't force her on dates like this anymore. He smiled sheepishly, and admitted that her mother had actually already called him. He said that she was very worried about the date and wondered how their relationship was, since she hadn't told her anything. Choi Yumi sighed wearily and smirked. Her mother was truly an amazing woman. Suddenly, she looked him straight in the eye and said that his family wanted him to marry her for their own benefit. But did he himself want to get married? Realizing she had been a bit blunt, she quickly apologized in embarrassment, but Lee Taeju went on to say that she was right. His father decided which university he had to attend, decided that he should become a doctor, and as the eldest son, he was expected to make a good marriage for the family. He looked down. Then he smiled wearily, saying he wanted to be honest with her since she had been honest with him. Then he smiled wearily, saying he wanted to be honest with her, since she had been honest with him. He admitted that his family's expectations were suffocating him. Yumi looked at him in surprise. After their honest conversation, they had shown each other a different side of themselves. She put down her knife and fork, and honestly said that she thought he was a very good person. He thanked her, and said that an honest conversation was better than a bunch of lies. He winked, suggesting that maybe one day she would change her mind and they could try again. Seeing her blush in confusion, he said that next time he wouldn't let her go so easily. Then he laughed heartily. She pouted and told him not to tease her. Suddenly, he asked why she hadn't touched her wine. Did she not like this type of wine? She sighed, her cheeks flushed, and replied that she had decided to quit drinking for a while. After leaving the restaurant, he offered to drive her home since it was on his way. But she said she still had things to do. She wished him all the best and turned away so quickly that Taeju didn't have time to respond. But she said she still had things to do. She wished him all the best and turned away so quickly that Taeju didn't have time to respond. Choi Yumi was surprised by its massive scale. She had never been here before. She walked to the reception desk, where a young man looked at her curiously and asked if he could help. She said she was there to see Director Jung. The young man, seeing her for the first time, asked if she had an appointment. Suddenly, one of her father's men appeared, asking why she hadn't called ahead to say she was coming. She replied that she wasn't there to see her father, but to see Director Jung and asked to be taken to him. As she got closer to his office, she saw some of his subordinates. As she got closer to his office, she saw some of his subordinates. They were all gangsters and looked very intimidating. She lowered her head bitterly, thinking that this was the world her father and this man, Jung Eun Gyo, lived in. They lived for the present, not looking far into the future, because death was always lurking around them. So they tried to live, so that when they died, they wouldn't regret the days they had lived. Seeing she was sad, the assistant asked if she was okay and if she needed anything. Choi Yumi just asked him not to tell her father she was there. Then she boldly walked into Jung Eun Gyo's office. He was sitting behind his desk, engrossed in some documents, looking perfect in every detail. She didn't even bother to greet him, striding quickly in front of him and demanding that he tell her. What happened to that stalker? Crossing her arms, she glared at him angrily, waiting for an answer. Jung Eun Gyo looked up at her calmly and then remained silent, surprised that she hadn't backed down, but dared to come see him directly. Then he leaned back in his chair, saying that if she came to argue, she should go ahead, as he would find it amusing. She gradually calmed down and admitted he was right. She had been truly scared, and even though she knew the outcome, she didn't want anyone to die. Then she suddenly became shy, and said she wanted to talk about what happened between them. He immediately tensed up but still listened intently. Hesitantly, she asked if he had used protection. Hearing this, he smirked predatorily. So this was what was bothering her. Choi Yumi said she didn't see any condoms in the trash, though she estimated there should have been 5 or 6. Is Young a beast? 5 or 6 rounds in one night? She understood that everything happened spontaneously, but still hoped he had thought about safety. He chuckled dryly, saying he only did as she wished, and she had told him to let her feel everything. Hearing that, she desperately asked if they had done it many times. Jung Eun Gyo lit a cigarette, wondering if she hadn't noticed the state of her own body the next morning. She was frozen with shame. How could he be so blunt? He had no intention of stopping and even detailed what he did to please her. At times, it seemed he was deliberately enjoying her embarrassment. After listening, Jung Eun Gyo smiled and asked if she was worried about her belly getting bigger. She shyly replied no, because she had taken a pill, but he didn't seem concerned at all. He said he wasn't worried because he was always ready to take responsibility if something happened. She realized they were both drunk then, giving in to their emotions without thinking. She looked him in the eye, suggesting they shouldn't dwell on what happened, thinking a smart man like him would understand her meaning. While she was talking, Jung Eun Gyo was staring at the marks he had left on her neck, which she was trying to hide under her high collar. He cut her off, saying that to him, their relationship was not meaningless or wrong. Choi Yumi looked at him in confusion. He stubbed out his cigarette and asked in a cold voice why she wanted to erase what had happened. He adjusted his tie, looking at her intently and asked. Choi Yumi looked at him in confusion. He stubbed out his cigarette and asked in a cold voice why she wanted to erase what had happened. He adjusted his tie, looking at her intently and asked. Didn't she do it to forget her ex-lover while she was with him? She stared at him, both bewildered and scared. What the hell was he talking about? But there was no way he could know about Jung Eun, especially since she had never mentioned him before. Then, she remembered that for just a fleeting moment, her ex's image had crossed her mind, but she would never allow herself to think of another man while in bed with someone. Jung Eun Gyo, at that moment, thought. Perhaps she didn't notice the difference because he and that person had a similar build. She became furious. Slamming her palm on the table with all her strength, she yelled that she had never imagined anyone in his place, and in case he had forgotten, she had called out his name, not someone else's, realizing she had just unintentionally fed his ego. She blushed in embarrassment. Jung Eun Gyo replied that he didn't care, whether it was him or another man in her head. As she said before, it was just a one-night stand, so she could leave now. Her anger flared up again, and she thought to herself, what a bastard. Seeing her still standing by his desk, he casually asked, what are you waiting for? Choi Yumi immediately flung open the office door and stormed out. Suddenly, her phone rang. It was her father calling. When she answered, she sarcastically remarked that he gets his news fast. She said she was coming home and had something serious to discuss, telling him to let her mother know. After hanging up, she sighed wearily. Giving up was the easiest option because more than anyone she knew, everything would ultimately go her parents' way. That was also the reason she had been going on blind dates all this time. Her mother had always dreamed of arranging her daughter's life just the way she wanted. Specifically, to marry her off into a successful and suitable marriage. Choi Yumi's opinion was never taken into account. Suddenly, a man appeared nearby saying he would take her home. Her parents had agreed. She was waiting for the elevator when she heard a noise next to her. Unexpectedly, Jung Eun Gyo was standing right there and simply remarked that she was leaving late today. The elevator doors opened and he stepped inside first, glancing at her expectantly. She clenched her fists. Telling herself not to react so she wouldn't lose, she stepped in. She coldly replied that, thanks to someone, she had to go to a place she didn't want to and waste her precious time. Interesting, he asked. Are you always this rude to other people? She scoffed, saying she usually wasn't. But lately, she had found herself acting this way. Then she told him he didn't need to take her home today, as someone else was already giving her a ride. The moment the elevator doors opened, she quickly stepped out, leaving decisively. She thought that every time she met this man, things went wrong. Around him, she felt so pathetic. Choi Yumi Gyo was standing there. Every time she looked at him, her heart was filled with frightening emotion. Now her intuition was telling her that things between them were not over. And what lay ahead was terrifying. Director Young's car sped down the road, and the thought of her made him smile from time to time. Glancing in the rearview mirror, the driver wondered what was going on with his boss. He thought back that the night with Choi Yumi was a mistake. Everything that happened was a mistake caused by alcohol and his overreaction to her actions. He clenched his fist but had to admit he didn't regret it. He had acted impulsively and had never lost control with anyone the way he did with her. That was the real problem. He sighed, finding it almost funny how easily he had fallen for her charm. In reality, this all started on the day they first met. He sighed, finding it almost funny how easily he had fallen for her charm. In reality, this all started on the day they first met. That day, the chairman took him to dinner with director Choi, who brought along his daughter Jumi, while the men cheerfully discussed business. For someone so young, she showed no emotion the entire evening. Perhaps her father had influenced her a lot. He knew he had to behave properly at this meeting, even though his mind was a mess. So, I'm afraid it would be difficult to be friends with the chairman's wife. Her father nearly choked on his drink, surprised by his daughter's response. She apologized and added that she was naturally too blunt. While her father fumed, the chairman laughed heartily, saying he liked a bold woman and told her not to hesitate to speak her mind. Jung Eun Gyo was impressed by how she maintained her composure and dared to speak so boldly to the chairman of Gusung Group. She was either fearless or simply didn't care about anything. At that moment, she looked up and their eyes met. It was as if it was the first time she had truly seen him all night. Then her face returned to its unreadable expression. Suddenly, the chairman suggested that Choi Yumi should become friends with his wife, saying they would probably get along. The person reported that even after 2 hours, Miss Choi Yumi was still at the table waiting for him. He cursed in frustration, saying he would handle it himself. Choi Yun Gyo stood behind her so she couldn't see him. He wondered what kind of person she really was, if she was plotting something or was just plain foolish. Suddenly, her phone rang. He overheard her telling a friend about going to her ex-boyfriend's wedding. She blatantly lied that she was fine, that her blind date was better than him in every way, and that she was thrilled. He smiled listening to her private conversation and realized she was far more interesting than she let on. Suddenly, her phone rang. He overheard her telling a friend about attending her ex-boyfriend's wedding. She blatantly lied that she was okay, that the man from her blind date was better than him in every way, and she was very happy. He smiled as he listened to that private conversation and realized she was much more interesting than she appeared. Her strange composure from that day was etched in his memory when the blind date was arranged. He originally had no intention of coming. He was exhausted from his workout at the gym when he received a call from Cheonju. This person reported that even after 2 hours, Miss Choi Yumi was still sitting at the table waiting for him, so he cursed in annoyance, saying he would handle it himself. He stood behind her so she couldn't see him, wondering what kind of person she really was. Whether she was plotting something or was simply foolish when suddenly her phone rang. He overheard her telling a friend about going to her ex's wedding, blatantly lying that she was fine, that her blind date was better than him in every way, and that she was overjoyed. He smiled as he listened to the private conversation, realizing she was much more interesting than she let on. Initially, he planned to leave, but changed his mind after hearing her. He was curious about her true personality. Just as she hung up, she saw a shadow approaching. Looking back, Jung Eun Gyo was certain his first mistake was not turning around and walking away, but approaching her instead. He remembered the look in her eyes as she begged him to stay, a woman who was like an iron doll suddenly opening her heart, showing him her true self. At that moment, a genuine curiosity ignited in him. Jung Eun Gyo wanted to see her completely fall apart, so he could peel away the fake facade she deliberately hid and see into the depths of her heart. He never planned for what happened between them, and that was a grave mistake. He wanted to know why that night. She drank one glass after another as if she'd die if she didn't get drunk. He wanted to understand what she was trying so desperately to forget. He must have been going crazy because he genuinely wanted to know what kind of man her ex was. If someone as cold and reserved as her could lose her mind over him, then suddenly, Her desperate face flashed in his mind, looking truly worried that their night together would have consequences. He crossed his arms and muttered that she was a fool, because he had warned her not to play with fire. And yet she did the exact opposite. As soon as Choi Yumi arrived at her parents' house, her mother immediately started nagging about how she rarely visited. She said it's not like she was the only one busy with work. Other people knew how to balance their work and family, but her daughter seemed to have forgotten. She complained that raising a child is a thankless job. Unable to take it anymore, she asked her mother if children were their parents' property whose opinions didn't matter. Her father came down the stairs hearing the argument and asked who she had picked a fight with this time to come home and vent. She greeted him, but he ignored her, continuing to lament that his only daughter had abandoned her parents for a shabby apartment and a small cafe. He went on complaining that his only daughter had left her parents for an apartment. She retorted, asking if it was so strange to visit Jung Eun Gyo after the meeting. He said it wouldn't be if he didn't know better. That she never liked the guy, and he knew it because his daughter was heartless. She knew her father was smart and not easily fooled. Finally, she said that if he didn't like it, she would stop seeing him. She also announced that she was there to say she wouldn't go on any more blind dates and had no plans to marry. Finally, she said that if he didn't like it, she would stop seeing him, and she also made it clear she came today to announce that she would no longer go on blind dates and had no intention of getting married, causing her mother to spit out her drink in shock. With newfound confidence, Choi Yumi said sternly that she had her own job and could support herself. For her, the only thing she needed to do was marry a decent man to recoup their costs and maybe even make a little profit. He asked if she thought her parents deserved to be thanked. Choi Yumi. From feeding her to buying this very cafe, the only thing she needed to do was marry a decent man so they could recoup their expenses and perhaps even make a profit. He asked Choi Yumi if she thought her parents deserved any thanks. Once again, she was reminded of why she hated coming home. He completely ignored his daughter's feelings. Director Choi continued saying Jung Eun Gyo was a cold, calculating man who would never be controlled by a woman. Eun Gyo is a cold, calculating man and would never let a woman control him. Choi Yumi abruptly stood up and walked straight to the door. She told her parents not to expect her back soon and to give up on her going on dates. Only knowing how to work and make lots of money, Choi Yumi suddenly stood up and walked straight to the door. She told her parents not to expect her back anytime soon. She told herself she had to obey her father because she was enjoying the benefits he provided. She was afraid of having to stand on her own 2 feet without her parents' support. Everything she had was his. Even the kind driver who just offered to take her home worked for her father. She told herself to do as her father wished because she was enjoying the benefits he provided. She was afraid of standing on her own 2 feet. Getting into the car, she decided not to go home for a while, until she could walk back in with her head held high. Outside, snow was falling, and many people were passing by, but the cafe was deserted. Suddenly, the doorbell chimed, and a graceful foot in an expensive shoe stepped across the cafe's threshold. As she began to make a drink before anyone arrived, she thought to herself, while Jung Eun Gyo is on a business trip in Japan, I can live peacefully. But what will I do when he suddenly returns? Suddenly, the doorbell chimed and a graceful foot in an expensive shoe stepped across the cafe's threshold. Eventually, she ordered an espresso and sat down at a table. Yumi felt uneasy, as if the woman's gaze was looking straight into her soul. Meanwhile, the mysterious customer sipped her coffee, still glancing at her from the corner of her eye, as if observing a strange creature. Inho noticed this, and asked the owner if she knew the woman, and why she was staring. She replied blankly that it was her first time seeing this woman. Yoonju went over to ask the customer if she wanted anything else, but she refused. It was strange for such a well-dressed woman to suddenly show up at a suburban cafe. Someone like her wouldn't come all this way just for a cup of coffee. Suddenly, Choi Yumi heard a crash behind her. Inho had dropped a plate and was now picking up the fragments. As if observing a strange creature, Inho noticed this and asked the owner if she knew the woman. The woman immediately stood up, thanked them for the service, and left the cafe, leaving the staff with countless questions. Choi Yumi silently watched the stranger go, wondering about the true purpose of her visit. Her younger colleagues invited her out for drinks, but she declined, saying she hadn't been drinking for a while. Suddenly, Choi Yumi felt nauseous and nearly fainted. Apologizing for being careless, she announced that closing time was near. The woman immediately stood up, thanked them for the service, and left the cafe, leaving the staff with countless questions. Choi Yumi silently watched the stranger go, wondering about the true purpose of her visit. Her younger colleagues invited her out for drinks, but she declined, saying she hadn't been drinking for a while. Suddenly, Choi Yumi felt nauseous and nearly fainted, but she declined, saying she had quit drinking for a while. Suddenly, Choi Yumi felt nauseous and nearly fainted. Her colleagues were alarmed and rushed to catch her. Yoonju worriedly asked if she was anemic. Choi Yumi forced a smile, saying she was fine and it was time to close up and rest. After seeing everyone off, she sat down. Her whole body felt stiff and tired, and she thought it might be stress or the flu. Then, a wild idea suddenly crossed her mind. A moment later, she sat in the bathroom, her hand over her mouth in shock as she saw the truth. 2 bright red lines. It was proof that a life was growing inside her. To be sure, she took the test a few more times, and they all came back with 2 lines. Choi Yumi stared at the test, stunned, a million questions and doubts swirling in her mind. With a lump in her throat, she placed a hand on her belly, thinking she should go to the clinic to be certain. She wasn't sure if this child was wanted and wondered what would happen if the man found out. Afterwards, Choi Yumi sat on the toilet. She wondered how this could have happened after just one night. Right at that moment, her father texted her. He told her she absolutely had to be at an event this week, and that she must come if she really thought she was mature and independent. A few days later, a major event took place, attended by many business people. She had just walked into the hotel lobby. She immediately heard someone call her name. A staff member said he had been waiting for her on her father's orders. He asked if she was all right. Choi Yumi replied awkwardly that she was just tired from not sleeping well. A few days ago, she went to the doctor and confirmed she was really pregnant. The doctor said no birth control is 100% guaranteed. Even with emergency contraceptive pills, cases like hers were not rare, but Choi Yumi had already known that since the previous night. She had spent a lot of time researching similar information online. At some point, she felt relieved knowing there were many other cases like hers. She also read about various symptoms of early pregnancy. The man's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. He said he would escort her to a private room. Her luggage had already been moved there. She told him to give her the key, saying she'd go on her own. He was surprised. He asked if she was going to the opening ceremony because it was about to start. Choi Yumi replied that no one would notice her absence even if she didn't go. So she asked for the key again and told him to get back to his work. She thought to herself it was a good thing she wore flats today. Her feet had been hurting a lot lately. She watched people preparing for the ceremony and thought about going to her room to rest. Suddenly, a tall and familiar male figure appeared right in front of her. She was startled to see Director Dung. She awkwardly greeted him and lowered her gaze. He greeted her back, saying it had been a long time. Choi Yumi said she heard he had just come back from a business trip in Japan. Suddenly, she recalled the time she barged into his office, demanding answers. She was sure if he knew she was pregnant, he would have taken her to the doctor himself to terminate the pregnancy, but she didn't want him to take any responsibility. His voice pulled her from her thoughts. Jung Eun Gyo had to tell her a few times that the elevator was here. Her mind was elsewhere. He was surprised by how flustered she seemed, and as he entered the elevator, he continued to stare at her. He was certain something about her was different, but he didn't know what. He was surprised by how cold and distant she was being. He also noticed that she wore flats to an event like this. Choi Yumi felt a wave of dizziness. Thinking it was due to poor sleep the last few nights, she lost her balance and started to fall backward. Fortunately, he caught her in time. Jung Eun Gyo held her against his chest, frantically asking if she was okay. She looked at him, bewildered. He noticed how frail she was, and that she seemed thinner. He angrily asked how she had been eating and when her last meal was. Feigning like this in the middle of the day, she felt his strong arms and was instantly reminded of the night they spent together. For him, nothing had changed, but her life was completely overturned. She pushed his hands away and retorted, asking if he was eating well or still using lobsters as ashtrays. There was probably only one person in the world who would use a lobster as an ashtray. Inside the elevator, the air was thick with tension, and Director Dung's men were on edge. Using a lobster as an ashtray, there's probably only one in the world. The atmosphere in the elevator was heavy, and Director Dung's men were tense, but he just stood there, smiling at her with amusement, still holding her hand. He teased her, wondering where the sweet, gentle woman he once knew had disappeared to. And if you don't want to be misunderstood, then don't behave so rudely. Where has the gentlewoman from before gone? If you don't want to be misunderstood, then stop acting so rude. The elevator doors opened, and he put his hand on her shoulder to help her out into the hall. She snapped that she had her own 2 feet and could walk on her own. Women with morning sickness. Oh my god. I'm sure many of you ladies are familiar with this. I have a younger sister who even got sick at the sight of her husband. He mentioned his room was across the hall, then turned to leave. Choi Yumi watched him go. Thinking he was so considerate and polite to her, once in her room, she sat on the bed, sighing wearily as she looked out at the city skyline. Thinking how thoughtful and polite he was, she went into her room, sat on the bed, and sighed wearily as she looked out. She said she wanted to rest for a while, but he insisted she come down for the opening ceremony. Choi Yumi let out a tired sigh, saying she just wanted to catch her breath, but her father angrily shouted that she had 1 minute to come down, and then hung up. Immediately, Choi Yumi sighed wearily, saying she just wanted to catch her breath, but her father shouted in anger. Suddenly, from the back row, Choi Yumi saw a familiar woman's face. It was the customer who had visited her cafe a short while ago. The woman walked onto the stage, greeted the audience, and introduced herself as Song Ha-young, the director of Gu Sung. She was certain it was the same person, and now she wondered why the chairman's wife had shown up at her little cafe. What was her purpose for visiting that day? Suddenly, her vision blurred and the world started spinning. She tried squinting to see better, but felt a wave of nausea hit her, and she stumbled, barely able to see. She dashed towards the restroom. Suddenly, she bumped into someone and quickly apologized without looking. She dashed towards the restroom, suddenly bumped into someone, and hastily apologized without looking up. Covering her mouth, she ran to the bathroom and dry-heaved continuously even though her stomach was empty. A moment later, she walked out into the hallway, trying to stand steady. She thought to everyone else, she looked no different than before, but inside, there was a baby that had turned her life upside down. Choi Yumi sighed wearily, thinking she still had a way out. She could end this nausea, this sleepiness, and get her life back to how it was. but then she felt her consciousness leaving her again. She started sliding down the wall, and in that moment, someone gently caught her and lifted her up. Jung Eun Gyo lifted her as easily as carrying a child. Looking at her unconscious face, he saw a single tear roll down her cheek. He thought to himself that this person would likely bring him a lot of trouble. A subordinate saw the boss carrying Yumi and asked if she was okay. He replied that she was fine. Then he turned away as if it was nothing special, continuing to carry her down the hall, holding her close to his chest. Choi Yumi slowly regained consciousness, wearily opening her eyes. She propped herself up on the bed and looked around. This clearly wasn't her room, and the last thing she remembered was walking out of the bathroom. She got off the bed, trying to remember that someone had carried her. Remembering nothing more, a sudden knock came at the door. She decided to open it, turning the knob. She saw director Song Ju-yang standing outside. The woman glared at her, rudely asking where the owner of this room was and what she was doing here. Choi Yumi wearily rubbed the back of her neck, saying she wasn't feeling well, so she came in to rest for a bit. Then she asked in return why she had come to the director's room. The woman indignantly said it was none of her business. She didn't like that rude attitude and replied that he wasn't in the room anyway, so she should come back later. She turned her back to go back into the room when she heard director Song Ju-yang angrily ask from behind, "How dare you speak to me like that?" She closed the door right in her face, wearily leaning her back against it. She didn't understand why this woman disliked her from their first meeting, as if Yumi had stolen director Jung from her. She knew her husband was the chairman, but the way she acted was as if Jung Eun Gyo was her husband, not her stepson. But thinking it over, she told herself not to worry about it. She quickly thanked him for his help, then apologized for the trouble and quickly left the room, making way for him to enter. But unexpectedly, she froze when she heard a cold, commanding voice from behind, calling her by name. She turned back. She replied that she wanted to leave so as not to disturb his rest. He calmly said that he hadn't said anything yet. He offered her the room key card and said she must have forgotten it, that she might need it. But she still didn't reach for the card. He asked what was wrong with her and why she was avoiding his gaze. But she still didn't reach for the card. He asked what was wrong with her and why she was avoiding his gaze. But she still didn't reach for the card. He asked what was wrong with her and why she was avoiding his gaze. Choi Yumi turned away and asked back why he was suddenly asking that. Jung Eun Gyo still tried to meet her eyes. Saying she looked guilty as if she'd done something wrong, she changed the subject and asked if he had eaten dinner. Then she said he must be tired of her and needed to rest. He said irritably that she was trying to change the subject. Yes, Yumi replied that he couldn't solve her problem anyway. She said she had a slight fever and wanted to go back to her room to rest. Unexpectedly, Jung Eun Gyo asked if she had taken medicine or needed any help. While he was off guard, she snatched the keycard from his hand and ran straight to her room. In her room, she showered and changed. She sat on the bed, still feeling unwell. Her head was spinning and her stomach was cramping. She lay down, curling up in pain. She hadn't eaten anything, but had no appetite. She didn't understand why she suddenly felt so awful. Suddenly, a chill ran down her spine, and a frightening thought flashed through her mind. She thought her pregnancy might be in danger and remembered reading that this happens quite often in the early stages. She placed a hand on her stomach, thinking that maybe it was for the best since no one around her would be happy about this baby. Her phone rang again. Breathing heavily, Choi Yumi reached for it and read the angry messages from her father. He blamed her for letting herself get like this and asked why she hadn't come down to the party yet. He texted that he was coming up to her room and she'd better be ready to go down with him. She looked at her phone screen with tired eyes and decided she needed to hide somewhere. Jung Eun Gyo heard a knock on his door just after he finished showering. He opened it, standing there in his sleepwear. She froze when she saw his toned body, six-pack abs, and his still wet hair. She tried to think of something to say, but in the end, she just stood there, stammering, her mind a mess. He looked at her with obvious impatience as she clutched her stomach. Taking advantage of her small stature, she slipped past his arms, saying she forgot something in the room and came back to get it. Jung Eun Gyo was surprised to see her scurrying around like that and asked what on earth she was looking for. She replied that she lost a hair tie. He crossed his arms, asking in a stern voice why she came to him at this hour, and why she was clutching her stomach earlier as if she was about to faint. He asked why she didn't call an ambulance as she pretended to search the floor. She stammered that it was just period cramps, that it happened every month and that he, as a man, wouldn't understand. Losing his patience, he told her to state her reason for coming to him, or he would throw her out of the room. She stared at the door, clearly hearing her father's footsteps, and knew she had to do something. In a moment of desperation, she turned to look him straight in the eye, begging him to save her and let her stay. She quickly added that her father was looking for her, and although she was uncomfortable sharing a room with him, being with her father was worse. She just wanted to rest a little. Jung Eun Gyo stared at her as if she were crazy. He sat down on the bed, continuing to watch her stand there in awkward silence. He crossed his arms. Then he said if she just stood there like that, she definitely wouldn't get any rest. He patted the empty space beside him as a signal. Inviting her closer, Choi Yumi's eyes widened in shock. He looked at her, his voice turning serious, saying, "Or come to me, or get out of here. Pick one." Such a domineering man. I wonder if he can even take care of me. An awkward silence filled the air. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard. She figured that if she met her father now, he wouldn't leave her alone and would force her to attend the event until the end. Especially when her body was aching, and she just wanted to lie down somewhere, looking at Jung Eun Gyo sitting on the bed with a smirk on his lips. She felt annoyed, but if she had to choose between him and her father, the choice was obvious. She thought he wasn't the type of man to take advantage of a sleeping girl, so she decided to go to the sofa. Getting into bed with him was too much. Did she forget what a beast she became the other night? And now she's going to the sofa, afraid to get into bed with that man. She lay down on the small sofa, clasping her hands, silently praying for her father to leave, so she could go back to her warm room and sleep in peace. He watched her with a scrutinizing gaze. Then he told her not to let her guard down and that she shouldn't so easily turn her back on someone like that. It's dangerous. Living in the criminal world, where a single slip-up could get you killed. Jung didn't find that strange at all. Hearing that, a chill ran down her spine. She turned back to glance at him. His eyes were fixed on her, a slight smirk on his lips, looking like a predator eyeing its innocent prey. She was terrified at the thought that instead of facing her father, she had walked into a lion's den. Suddenly, she asked if he was going to sleep. He replied, "How can I sleep when you just barged into my room like that?" She said then he shouldn't have opened the door for her. But he was surprised by her audacity, smirking and saying she was being insolent again. Choi Yumi stared at him and suddenly realized that to reach his current position, he must have shed a lot of blood. She thought about what he could do to her. If he knew she was pregnant with his child, she shuddered in fear. But then she thought that despite his status, he had always shown her more care and attention than necessary. He didn't turn to her, only saying that the way she was looking at him was disrespectful. When he heard her whisper that she would stop looking, he turned back and said she was much more obedient that night. But now she was always prickly like a porcupine. Choi Yumi blushed, startled, and said she didn't remember anything about that night. He was clearly enjoying teasing her, asking how she could forget crying and begging him to do those things. She panicked and begged him to stop teasing her so cruelly. She said embarrassedly that she really wasn't lying and barely remembered what happened. Suddenly, Jung Eun Gyo told her to come and lie down next to him. She stood up, walking slowly and hesitantly. Suddenly, his hand gripped her arm. A second later, he pulled hard, making her fall on top of him, her cheek against his bare chest, her face instantly flushed, practically drooling with pleasure. Sitting in his arms, she heard her heart pounding. She looked up into his eyes. He teasingly asked if she remembered anything, and she turned away, saying she remembered what happened between them. But the memory was vague. Suddenly, he covered his face and laughed. He asked if she would be okay sleeping in the same bed with him again. She insisted it was an emergency, and besides, she was sick. He leaned in close and told her not to use her sickness as a shield, because it wouldn't stop the beast inside him. She froze as she felt his lips brush along her cheek and his hand gently stroke her spine. Goosebumps erupted all over her body. She felt something was about to happen. She quickly pulled away, saying she should leave then. Suddenly, he gave her a strange look, took out his phone, and told someone to get a doctor to his room right now. Hearing that, Choi Yumi almost dropped her phone. She yelled that there was no need to call a doctor. Jung Eun Gyo looked at her in surprise. She was terrified the doctor would find out about the pregnancy and tell him. She begged him not to call a doctor, promising she'd get better soon. A man's voice came from the other end of the line. She said it was hard to get a doctor now because the snow was too heavy. She was surprised at how easily she lied. She said she'd taken painkillers and just needed to wait for them to work. Suddenly, he cut her off. In a low, harsh, but calm voice, he asked how long she planned on feeding him that nonsense. Choi Yumi looked at him, speechless. He watched her with his sharp eyes. He asked if she really thought he was an idiot. Her heart sank. She couldn't believe he knew the truth. He couldn't possibly know the truth. With the blizzard raging outside, she figured he was just the only one to notice she wasn't well. Suddenly, she heard him sigh and say that if she didn't need a doctor, she had to take proper care of herself. His expression softened, but she swore that just seconds ago, he had looked at her as if he could see right through her soul. She composed herself and said she'd be fine with some rest. Jung Eun Gyo didn't believe a word of it, but he still stroked her hair and told her to lie down and rest. Choi Yumi couldn't believe she'd gotten away with it so easily. She looked up and then froze. Jung Eun Gyo calmly lay down, resting his head on one arm, and closed his eyes. His chest rose and fell gently. She sat silently, watching his calm face. It was strange to see this always imposing man look so peaceful. He was very handsome, and realizing it made her cheeks flush. Suddenly, he told her not to stare at him like that. He said he'd told her before that staring was rude. Had she never seen a handsome man before? He said that since this was his room, he wouldn't be responsible if her father scolded her. Choi Yumi leaned back more comfortably, replying that was exactly why she would take advantage of his hospitality. After a moment, he asked her a question. She turned her head to look at him. He said she didn't seem to like what her father was doing. So why did she still obey him? She clasped her hands together, hesitating. She wasn't sure if he really wanted to hear the answer. She thought he would probably forget what she said soon anyway. So she decided to share. He watched her from the corner of his eye. She took a deep breath and said, "Everyone would be more comfortable if she sacrificed herself and did as her father wished." Jung Eun Gyo looked at her with a puzzled expression. He asked what sacrificing herself meant. She explained that her future and her peace depended on her obedience. If she resisted, she would be oppressed for her whole life, so it was better to just accept it. If she pretended to obey, at least her father would let her breathe a little easier. Jung Eun Gyo listened with mixed emotions. He didn't expect her to be so frank. Then he suddenly said that wasn't a sacrifice at all. Hearing that, she turned to look at him fully. He said that instead of solving the problem, she chose to sit obediently and do nothing. That's not sacrifice. That's running away from the problem. He asked, if you were trying to run away from your problems, how did you end up here with me? Running from one problem into another, even bigger and more complicated one. Choi Yumi suddenly realized he was right. All this time, she had been running away. She thought it would be easier, but it was really just because she was afraid of making decisions. She wanted to say, no one could guarantee she'd be better off if she stopped avoiding things, but she thought that sounded like an excuse, so she decided to change the subject. Suddenly, she asked if he often slept next to other girls like this. He just told her to stop talking and go to sleep. She teased that he was the one who started the conversation. Jung Eun Gyo decided to tease her back, starting to call her by an intimate nickname. Jagi in Korean means darling, honey, or baby, which made her blush. She quickly told him not to tease her. She said she really didn't like being asked personal questions. He replied that he didn't like being disturbed or nagged either. Hearing that, Choi Yumi asked why he let her stay in his room then. He smugly asked back if she was ready to face the consequences of her curiosity. She fell silent, pulling the blanket up to her chin. She found it strange to be with him. Even though he was one of the most dangerous men she'd ever known, she wasn't afraid to turn her back to him. She watched his calm face and his steady breathing. She felt herself calming down, maybe because of hormones, or maybe because of his signature rich, woody scent. She scooted closer, enjoying the warmth and peace beside him on this snowy night. See folks, from the very beginning, it's been hard to tell who's playing who. That vixen Choi Yumi's acting is top tier. Director Dung is just a pawn in her game. The next morning, on the way to breakfast, Choi Yumi read the angry messages from her father. He was annoyed by her absence at yesterday's event, saying he had left early in the morning and would wait for her at home later. But the only thing she could think about was how peacefully she had slept for a night. Right next to Director Dung, she had slept so soundly that she didn't even hear him leave the room. Moreover, she hadn't told him that Director Song, Hae Young, had come looking for him. Judging by her hurried tone, it seemed she had something urgent to discuss. She walked into the restaurant and saw that the table where her father's business partners were sitting was also where she was invited for breakfast. Director Song Hae Young was saying that even though she runs the company, she still relies heavily on the director's help. Jung then smiled brightly at everyone. Yumi approached and gave an awkward greeting. The woman turned to look at her. She said that it seemed they had met before, then gave a radiant smile. Choi Yumi bowed her head slightly to thank her for the invitation. Suddenly, memories of that night flooded back, how he had made her beg, made her say thank you. Now he sat there, his expression cold, watching her intently. She stood frozen in place. Her face flushed as she wondered why she was thinking about this now. Song Hae Young called out to Choi Yumi. Pulling her out of her thoughts, she asked if she was okay and invited her to sit at the table. Song Hae Young handed her a glass of aperitif. The woman assured her that she would definitely like it. Choi Yumi was still thinking about how she couldn't remember anything about that night before. And yet now, those memories were suddenly resurfacing. She sat down in her seat, continuing to feel uncomfortable under his watchful gaze. At that moment, Miss Song raised her glass and asked why she wasn't taking a sip. Wasn't she going to taste what was offered? Yumi replied that she simply didn't like to drink in the morning. Song Hae Young smiled. She said that such an answer was either brave or reckless, but Choi Yumi didn't flinch. She even thanked her for the compliment. Jung Eun Gyo chuckled softly, thinking this girl was good. She knew how to protect herself. Then he laughed louder, making both women look at him in confusion. Song Hae Young gritted her teeth, muttering jealously and annoyedly that it had been a long time since Director Dung had laughed like that. Choi Yumi observed carefully, noticing the strange atmosphere and that persistent gaze. It was just like how an ex-girlfriend looks at her ex-boyfriend. But she couldn't believe this woman was interested in the director. After a high-profile wedding to the chairman, what was the real relationship between these two? He smiled. He said that today's breakfast was just very interesting and unexpected. Song Hae Young burst out laughing, saying she heard the two of them had been on a blind date. Then she asked Yumi if Director Dung wasn't a bit gloomy. Choi Yumi calmly replied that wasn't true, and that Director Dung was one of the most interesting and humorous men she had ever met. She said she'd had a very good time. Director Song was a bit annoyed, saying Yumi was judging someone too quickly after only meeting the director Dung a couple of times. Choi Yumi thought to herself that Song Hae Young was too arrogant, used to everyone bowing down to her, just because she was the chairman's wife. But she didn't stop there, saying she had seen Director Dung reluctantly go on blind dates, which never went anywhere. She asserted that Director Dung only saw the women on these dates as a game and was always wary of them. Choi Yumi decided that was enough. She suddenly slammed her glass on the table, her face still innocent as she said she was sorry. But she forgot to tell Jung Eun Gyo that she went to his room last night, not knowing if they had met. She said she might have misunderstood and didn't realize they had such a close relationship. Then, Hae-young's jaw dropped in indignation at being dissed like this at the VIP table. If it were me, I would have crawled under the table out of shame. I told you, Choi Yumi is a sly fox who doesn't just manipulate the cold-blooded boss. Now with just a few words, she completely had the upper hand on that Hae-young. Choi Yumi put on a polite smile. I'm sorry for misjudging you. The entire table immediately fell silent. Choi Yumi was satisfied she had hit a nerve. And from now on, that woman wouldn't dare humiliate her over the blind date anymore. Jung Eun Gyo couldn't hold back a hearty laugh. He burst out laughing, genuinely impressed by how Choi Yumi clapped back at that vixen. He twirled the lighter in his hand, saying he didn't have time for pointless breakfast, so he was leaving first. He stood up, looked at Choi Yumi and asked, "Why are you still sitting there? Aren't you coming with me?" He casually walked to the door. She awkwardly thanked the director who had invited them for breakfast, then got up and followed him out. The angry and hurt woman watched them leave, her heart filled with jealousy, thinking how ridiculous it all was. Choi Yumi stood in front of the hotel, hesitating on whether she should go with Jung Eun Gyo or not. The car pulled up, and he asked if she was planning on getting in. She was about to say she'd call her own ride, but he clicked his tongue. He replied that he didn't think Director Choi would like that. He added that if she didn't get in, she could just walk back to Seoul. Wearily, she got into the car. She thought that because of yesterday's snow, it would take them hours to get to Seoul. She couldn't believe she had to be in the same car with this man for so long. She had an OB/GYN appointment tomorrow, and she was worried if the baby was okay. She recalled taking countless tests out of fear, and all of them came back with 2 lines. Even the sales clerk told her that with so many positive results, she was definitely pregnant. She gently placed a hand on her belly, thinking that even though nothing showed, this tiny being could cause her mood to swing all day and keep her on edge. She didn't know what to do. It felt like being stuck in a repetitive loop. She didn't realize Director Dung was still watching her very closely, and had noticed her constantly stroking her belly. Finally, she felt his scrutinizing gaze. She asked uncomfortably, "Why are you staring at me?" He smirked, saying she was looking at him too. Choi Yumi blushed and quickly said she was just hungry. He was still watching her very closely and noticed her constantly stroking her belly, and she finally felt his scrutinizing gaze. She didn't know what to do. She was already feeling dizzy, and the cigarette smoke in this confined space would only make it worse. She couldn't bring herself to tell him not to smoke, only thinking of opening a window. Director Dung noticed her strange reaction. Understanding that for some reason she would be bothered by the smoke, his subordinate turned to light him a cigarette. She couldn't bring herself to tell him not to smoke, only thinking of opening a window. Director Dung noticed her strange reaction. Understanding that for some reason she would be bothered by the smoke, his subordinate turned to light him a cigarette. But he said he was tired of cigarettes and told them to stop somewhere on the road so he and she could have a good meal. He crossed his arms, explaining that he couldn't just leave her like this, especially since yesterday. Her condition still hadn't improved. Besides, she'd be more appealing to him if she put on some weight, because she had obviously gotten thinner. Choi Yumi blushed, thinking to herself, how can he be so blunt? So crude. With a nonchalant look, he went on to say that she had very impressive features, but if she wanted to continue to pique his interest, she should eat what he suggested. Very impressive, but if you want to keep sparking my interest, then eat what I suggest. Replying that flattery was the key to a long and happy life, Jung Eun Gyo looked at her like a predator. He said she should have been more careful and kept her guard up. She looked at him fearfully, thinking he was serious. But now she had to protect not just herself, but also the baby in her womb. Seeing that she didn't talk back, he smiled. But now she had to protect not just herself, but also the baby in her womb. Seeing that she didn't talk back, he smiled. He began to enjoy the trip. Choi Yumi arrived at the hospital and was waiting for her appointment. She watched the passing couples with a sad gaze. Her train of thought was interrupted when an assistant said the doctor was ready for her. Dr. Cho said she was 5 weeks along and that everything with the baby was fine. But according to the test results, her own condition was a bit abnormal. So the doctor told her to take better care of herself and to come for a follow-up. So the doctor advised her to take better care of herself and to come back for a checkup. Choi Yumi listened to the doctor. Anxiously, she fiddled with the water cup in her hands, not brave enough to ask what she really wanted to know. The doctor noticed the worry in her eyes. She then asked if she had any other questions. Choi Yumi crushed the cup, thinking back on how she had rarely made any decisions for herself her entire life. And now she was forced to make one herself. Late that evening at home, a friend called to invite her to the beach. She asked back, why is a bride to be so free? Hisan replied cheerfully that it was her last chance to relax before the wedding, so she invited her to come along this weekend. She rarely made her own decisions, and now she was forced to. Late that evening, at home, Choi Yumi regretfully placed a hand on her stomach, saying she had something urgent to do this weekend. Hisan said disappointedly that she had really hoped they could spend time together. Afterwards, she peeled a tangerine and sighed heavily, thinking how she was always craving something special these days, even though almost everything else made her feel sick. Popping a tangerine slice into her mouth, she suddenly recalled that she never used to like fruit. Suddenly, a strong wave of nausea hit, forcing her to run to the bathroom. Choi Yumi was exhausted from constantly vomiting and hungry again. She thought this would all pass in a few days. She dragged her exhausted body to the sofa, thinking the baby seemed to sense something unusual and was always trying to get her attention. as if it wanted to touch her heart and hold her hand. She curled into a ball, wishing for the guilt to leave her alone. Director Dung's car sped through the city. And hold her hand. She curled into a ball, wishing for the guilt to leave her alone. Director Dung's car sped through the city. She thought everything would be over in a few days. She wearily walked to the sofa, thinking that the baby seemed to sense something unusual, and was always trying to get her attention as if to touch her heart and hold her hand. She curled into a ball, just wishing the guilt would let her go. Director Dung's car sped through the city. On a snowy evening, he sat thoughtfully looking out the window, recalling past events. Two annoying people had tried everything to persuade him to continue their partnership. They wanted to open more hotel chains, and although he had refused many times, the woman kept pestering him. It frustrated him because of her he had accidentally gotten on Chairman Kwon's bad side. He couldn't stand that type of woman. But lately, he couldn't stop thinking about Choi Yumi. He smiled at the thought. It seemed that even if Director Choi planned to use his power, he still went easy on his daughter and worried for her. Jung Eun Gyo was annoyed that Yumi's eyes were always so indifferent, as if she didn't care about anything. The distant way she looked at him only intrigued him more. He recalled their recent breakfast and thought that although he'd considered her a weak hamster who couldn't defend herself, she was actually a wildcat with sharp claws, ready to bite if needed. Honestly, calling her a cat is an understatement, bro. She's a true lioness disguised as a fox. Weak, unable to protect herself, but in reality, she was a wildcat with sharp claws, ready to bite if necessary. Calling her a cat is selling Choi Yumi short, man, a true lioness in fox's clothing. That left him both pleased and curious. He laughed out loud, unable to believe himself. He still didn't understand why he did it. The image of Yumi kept popping into his head, which annoyed him. That night at the hotel, while it was snowing, he let a stranger get into his bed and sleep next to him. He still didn't understand why he did it. The image of Yumi kept haunting his thoughts, making him frustrated. When he saw the word pregnant in the medical report, it was like he'd been struck by lightning. She was carrying his child. He reported that Yumi had recently visited an OB/GYN for an examination, and then handed the medical file to his boss. That meant that after that night, all her strange behavior was because she was carrying his child. Jung Eun Gyo was certain she wasn't the type of woman who would sleep with a stranger after what happened between them. That night, he let his emotions take over, and this was the result. He himself couldn't believe that Director Choi's cautious daughter would get pregnant with a stranger. And so, caught up in the image of Jumi with a round belly, a warm feeling swelled up in his chest. He thought it would be quite funny, but of course, they would inevitably cause a scene about it. And so, caught up in the image of Jumi with a round belly, a warm feeling swelled up in his chest. That today she was scheduled for surgery to terminate it. Hearing that, anger flared up all over him. Director Dung was smiling at Jumi's checkup results when his subordinate coughed lightly and said there was something important. He had to inform him that today she was scheduled for surgery to terminate it. Hearing that, anger flared up all over him. At first, he thought he misheard. He gripped the file tightly, thinking how dare she? How could she think she could just erase the memory so easily? About that night, he growled that this wasn't funny at all. But the memory of that night was still vivid in his mind, and it was something they hadn't planned at all. Now that it had come to this, he unconsciously pulled out a pack of cigarettes, but then he suddenly remembered his recent trip with her. He immediately asked his subordinate if smoking was harmful during pregnancy, and the subordinate replied that both cigarettes and alcohol are. He then asked about intimacy, whether it would affect the baby, and his subordinate answered, "It's okay, but should be limited during the first trimester." He was a bit embarrassed by the topic of conversation. A moment later, Director Dung's car stopped in front of Choi Yumi's cafe, and he sat inside, looking through the window. He saw her happily laughing and chatting with a colleague, and thought he was lucky that her position wasn't too restrictive. Choi Yumi looked at her phone. Director Dung had called her for the nth time that day, but she debated whether to answer. Suddenly, the doorbell rang even though the shop was closed. She turned to say they were closed until tomorrow, but saw Jung Eun Gyo walk in calmly. Later, in the car, he smirked and asked what about her period cramps. She looked down in embarrassment. He said he hated liars the most. Choi Yumi replied that she didn't tell the truth because she was afraid of his reaction. He gave her a threatening look, saying that not only did she lie, but she also tried to pretend he wasn't the baby's father. She was about to argue, but he stopped himself, telling her to calm down for the baby's sake. But she just sighed heavily and told him to stop. She scoffed at his display of concern, as she was already exhausted. Director Dung ignored her and asked another question. "So what now, since you're not pregnant by the man you wanted to be?" Hearing that, Yumi tensed up immediately. She asked what he meant, but he just smirked and told her not to play dumb, that she could forget her ex-boyfriend so quickly. She was surprised he knew so much about her private life and asked how he knew. He looked at her sternly, saying that if he even knew about the moles on her most private parts, knowing her ex-boyfriend's name and details was a piece of cake. He also knew. So for him to know the name and personal information of her ex-boyfriend, the two goons looked like they were constipated. She lowered her head and mumbled that he always made her blush. Such a private conversation, but they kept a straight face. Well, not that straight. The two goons looked like they were constipated. She lowered her head and mumbled that he always made her blush. Then suddenly, she demanded to know how he knew she bought tangerines, asking if he had been following her. He was silent for a moment, watching her breathe heavily in discomfort. He crossed his arms and asked seriously, "Were you planning to have this baby by yourself?" Choi Yumi turned her back on him. She said that whether it was about eating tangerines or anything else, she would handle it herself and demanded he let her go. She said what he was doing was kidnapping. Director Jung calmly told her to go ahead and report him, or to scream that the baby's father was kidnapping her, and see how many people would come to her rescue. She said that whether it was about eating tangerines or anything else, she would handle it herself and demanded he let her go. She said what he was doing was kidnapping. Director Jung calmly told her to go ahead and report him, or to scream that the baby's father was kidnapping her, and see how many people would come to her rescue. She was about to argue but was suddenly hit by a wave of nausea. He just remarked that she couldn't even take care of herself. His eyes glanced down at her sneakers, remembering he had heard that pregnant women usually avoid wearing high heels to protect herself and the baby. Then he recalled their meeting at the hotel and realized that's why she was wearing flats. And it turned out to be true. He'd also heard that pregnant women often eat even when they aren't hungry. At first, these thoughts made him uneasy because the other day she'd said she was hungry, and he had told her to ignore it. He had also been about to smoke in the car, but then he decided to quit smoking and even felt healthier for it. He told her to take care of herself and listen to him, and both she and the baby would be fine. Choi Yumi started to protest. He decided that by staying close and observing her, he'd figure out if his feelings were just lust, or if he truly cared for her. A short while later, the car stopped in front of the high-rise building where Jung Eun Gyo lived. When they got there and went inside, Choi Yumi saw a table laden with food. He sighed and said he had only asked for a little bit of food, but his men had bought out half the store. Choi Yumi was about to say again that she was really fine and could handle things herself. "Yes," Director Jung said. Of course he believed her. Then he started rolling up his sleeves and told her to go shower and change. He looked at her more seriously and said that from now on, they should speak informally and she should call him by his name. Choi Yumi suddenly said that during the first trimester, it's important to avoid stress. He asked if she was implying that he was the cause of her stress. She replied to just take it as a request. That didn't sit well with him, so he asked again. "Did you think I brought you here just to watch you give birth?" She probably felt she had said too much, while he looked at her smugly and with some suspicion. He told her to calm down and not be afraid of him, because there was no reason to tremble before the father of her child. He stepped back a bit, saying he always thought about her terrified expression, and that it was interesting. She had no idea what he was talking about. Suddenly, he hung his jacket on the back of a chair and slammed his hand on the table. Without turning around, his voice dropped to a threatening low. He asked how fast she would run to the clinic if he let her go. Then, he whipped around. His sharp, angry gaze sent a chill down her spine. She guessed he already knew about her surgery scheduled for today. Earlier that evening, Jumi got a text from Hisan saying he'd wait at the hotel if she changed her mind. She called a friend, saying the plan had changed and she wanted to go to the beach. She admitted to herself that ever since finding out she was pregnant, she had always known she would love this baby and could never harm it. Now, he stood before her, imposing and demanding an answer. She started to fidget and then confessed that she had really considered it, but in the end, decided to keep the baby because she just couldn't go through with it. Jung Eun Gyo took off his watch and said that if that was the case, then fine. He demanded she keep quiet until the baby was born, and not to cause any more trouble. He said she was too unpredictable, and he couldn't completely trust her. She retorted angrily that he himself had just said he didn't care about her, and that he didn't know anything about her to begin with. Jung didn't even bother to listen, answering his phone instead. Choi Yumi could only watch him helplessly, wanting to say more. But he had already walked to the window, phone to his ear. She remembered the first time she let him into her apartment, he had stood by the window just like that. He had one hand in his pocket, talking on the phone. She couldn't understand his intentions and actions, sadly thinking that her baby bump would start to show sooner or later, and wondering what she would tell her mom. She was certain that knowing her parents, if they found out she was pregnant, they would drag her to the hospital for the procedure. Ironically, if they found out she was pregnant, they would drag her to the hospital for the procedure. Ironically, the only person who could protect her baby was the man standing right in front of her. She couldn't manage on her own, and her family certainly wouldn't leave her be. She went to the dining table and picked up a peach. She told herself this was no time for pride. She needed to focus on a healthy pregnancy, and she would figure out the rest later. She took a small bite, afraid she'd feel nauseous again. Director Jung was still on the phone, watching her reflection in the window. He saw her start to eat the fruit and smirked, thinking it was good that she was finally eating something. She asked where he was going. He said he had to go out for work and would be back very late. He told her to enjoy her meal. Then he closed the door behind him, leaving her with a head full of questions. The next morning, Choi Yumi stood in his kitchen. Then he closed the door behind him, leaving her with a head full of questions. The next morning, Choi Yumi stood in his kitchen. Wearing his t-shirt, she apologized to Hee-san for not being able to hang out as planned, saying something urgent came up at work. Yumi reassured her friend, saying it was just work. While talking to her friend, Yumi thought Hee-san was too sharp and would suspect something sooner or later. She started eating her fruit salad. Yumi thought Hee-san was too sharp and would suspect something sooner or later. She started eating her fruit salad. She was afraid her mother would be very worried about her. Yesterday, when she discovered there was only one large bed in the apartment, she was shocked. She thought it was better than letting her parents know she was pregnant. Once the baby was born, they would have no choice but to accept it. Suddenly, she felt dizzy. A noise outside the door put her on alert, so she went out and asked who was there. Jung entered, breathing heavily, his face flushed. One hand clutched his right side, and Choi Yumi frantically asked what had happened. "Are you hurt?" He limped past her, trying to reassure her by joking that he was not dead yet. He told her not to overreact. Choi Yumi was horrified when she saw drops of blood on the floor behind him, and she rushed over to touch his shoulder. She frantically said he was bleeding. He turned around and leaned heavily against her, unable to keep his balance. She panicked, calling his name repeatedly, urging him to wake up. Jung breathed heavily and told her to be quiet because his head was splitting. She panicked, calling his name repeatedly, urging him to wake up. Jung breathed heavily and told her to be quiet because his head was splitting. His men rushed in with a doctor, immediately asking about their boss's condition. They laid him on the bed and unbuttoned his shirt. As they started treating the wound, one of the men kept reassuring Choi Yumi that everything would be okay. She stared blankly at his injured body, unable to move. He raised his hazy eyes to look at her terrified face. He told her not to stand there like a ghost and to go outside so she would not get more scared. She replied that she was not going anywhere. When he asked again, she insisted she would stay by his side. She rushed closer, and he grumbled that she never listened. The subordinate asked him how he felt. He nodded and said he was fine, that the wound was not serious. He wanted to handle it himself before letting his men interfere. Afterwards, Director Jung ordered them to clean up that trash. The subordinate nodded and said they already suspected who the culprit was. But getting proof was very difficult. He said if this case led them to Song Ha-yang, they would have to deal with her, making things even more complicated. Hearing that, Yumi wondered why that woman was involved in this. The subordinate asked if he was ready to take drastic measures, since he had always ignored her schemes. Would it be wise to act now? Jung Eun Gyo hesitated and fell silent. Then he said it was best to hold off for now. It would be more effective to back her into a corner first. The doctor finished bandaging the wound, saying that luckily it was not serious, but it was quite deep, so he needed to rest. He said there was no need to make a big deal out of it. After the doctor and his subordinate left, Choi Yumi looked at the bandages wrapped around his chest in horror. With tears in her eyes, Yumi sat on the bed. He asked why she was crying. She wiped her face, saying she was not. Her eyes were just red from lack of sleep. He leaned his head back, wearily saying he was the one in pain, yet she was the one crying. Then he joked that if she did not stop crying, he would not kiss her anymore. She immediately retorted that she never asked him to kiss her. He laughed, saying she was looking at him like she was sending a signal. In his mind, he sighed wearily. He pulled out a pack of cigarettes and told her to go outside so she would not have to inhale the smoke. Choi Yumi got up from the bed. She said to call her if he needed anything. He wearily rubbed his forehead and then suddenly asked when her due date was. Surprised, she turned back and said she was embarrassed to admit it, but since she was not sure about keeping the baby at first, she did not remember the exact date. The due date was sometime in the fall. What surprised her was that he calmly asked why she had changed her mind. Choi Yumi replied that she had not changed her mind. She just realized she did not want to take away the baby's chance to be born. She had been betrayed by a friend and dumped by the love of her life. For years, she had lived like a puppet without a purpose, so she decided this child would be the one she would give all her love and care to. Jung Eun Gyo listened intently, his eyes looking as if he were deep in thought. She picked up the shirt, saying she would wash it and clean up the mess he had made, but he suddenly told her to leave it and lie down to rest. She asked if she could have another bed. This both surprised and amused him, and he asked what the problem was with lying next to him. The bed was more than big enough, and they had slept together many times before. Yumi blushed and hesitated, and he told her to stop being stubborn. Just lie down, because he was tired too. He even promised to rub her back. She lay on the very edge of the bed, wrapping her arms around herself. Wearing only a man's t-shirt, she felt uncomfortable. Jung Eun Gyo noticed this. He said she did not need to be shy in front of him, because they were already intimate enough. Suddenly, he hugged her, smiling suggestively. He said they were both drunk last time, so he wanted to see her face when she was sober, as he turned her to face him. Choi Yumi immediately scolded him, asking if he had forgotten his stitches could tear open. He replied that he was indeed a bit weak today because of the wound. Then he chuckled softly. Seeing she did not understand, he said he would help her and pulled her hand towards him. 2 t-shirts fell to the floor, and he kissed her possessively, and they shared a passionate moment, giving each other their all. We will have to direct you to the original story for this part. Afterwards, it was time for a bath. Scene change. The bathroom door swung open. Jung Eun Gyo entered, carrying her in his arms. She looked exhausted. The one with the wound was still strong enough to completely wear out the other one. He gently placed her in the bathtub, telling her to call him immediately if she felt unwell at work tomorrow. She was silent. Then he asked if she was upset about what had just happened. Choi Yumi replied that if anything happened to the baby, he would have to take responsibility. He told her not to worry, that he would take perfect care of her. Choi Yumi lowered her head as if he could see her blushing cheeks, saying that was easy for him to say. She, on the other hand, felt embarrassed about many things. He said it was normal to be shy the first time, and Jung smiled. He said that when she was sober, she was really different. Then he warned her never to drink when other men were around, or she might get herself into trouble. She asked why he was bringing that up so suddenly. Dung said it was because she acted impulsively when she drank. Hearing that, she quickly defended herself, saying she was not like that. He sat on the edge of the tub, sarcastically saying she must have had a divine revelation that day, making them fated to be together. She shot back, "And what about you? Do you often get drunk and sleep with women?" Jung Eun Gyo replied that sleeping around indiscriminately can give you a stomachache. Yumi blushed, saying he was such a strange person. He sighed, replying that it was true, because actions without clear motives are the scariest thing of all. The next day, Director Dung was at the office building, but his subordinate reported that they had discovered Song Ha-yang was behind the incident, just as they had initially suspected. He looked out the window, musing that he had not decided whether to tear them to shreds or just spread rumors. Song Ha-yang was the mastermind, and he could kill her instantly. But to end things for good, he had to sway Chairman 1. The whole situation was extremely frustrating. His subordinate offered him a cigarette. He reached for the pack, but then he remembered Yumi and how she always avoided the smell of smoke, though she never told him to stop. He waved it away, saying he was not in the mood for a cigarette anymore. He chuckled, finding it funny how such a small thing could greatly affect his daily habits. He ordered his subordinate to buy peaches and bring them to the house for the young lady. The subordinate excitedly asked if he should also buy strawberries, since she had been enjoying them lately, and bring them to the house for the young lady. The subordinate excitedly asked if he should also buy strawberries, since she had been enjoying them lately. The director asked why he was acting so jumpy, then told him to buy whatever he thought was good, as long as it was delicious and she would eat it. Otherwise, he would personally shove it all down his throat. The subordinate said he would get it done, then asked if his boss was attending the upcoming party. Director Dung said of course, because it was the chairman's birthday. Just then, Choi Yumi was surprised to receive an invitation to her ex-boyfriend's exhibition. What surprised her even more was that it was sent by her former friend, AK. AK, the homewrecker who married him, had sent it. She wondered why they would invite her and whether she should even go. She shyly said she was fine and reminded him that it was still a secret for now. He quickly reassured her that he had not told anyone. Choi Yumi thanked him for his concern and for keeping her secret. She shyly said she was fine and reminded him that it was still a secret for now. He quickly reassured her that he had not told anyone. The invitation was from her former friend AK, the homewrecker, the mistress. She walked straight to the counter and told Yumi to make her an iced Americano. The woman crossed her arms, smirking. Yumi wondered why she was here again. The woman sneered that she had heard Yumi was pregnant. At that moment, Yumi froze in shock. Ha-yang asked if she should not be more careful. Yumi turned around and asked how she knew. The woman sneered, saying that nothing spreads faster than rumors in a neighborhood like this. She added that there were many rumors about the director finding a new woman while Yumi was still clueless. Yumi nervously thanked her for her concern. She said she could imagine the nasty rumors that would spread about Yumi. In a cold voice, Yumi replied, "Does the order of things really matter that much?" She said she could imagine the nasty rumors that would spread about Yumi. In a cold voice, Yumi replied, "Does the order of things really matter that much? The outcome is the same anyway." Yumi thanked her for the concern. In this day and age, what's so surprising about getting pregnant before marriage? Suddenly, Song Ha-yang gave Yumi a strange look and asked if it was really Director Dung's child. She glared at her, asking in horror, "What are you talking about?" Young replied that she knew the director well, and he wasn't the type to make mistakes or carelessly get involved with women. Choi Yumi was furious, unable to believe this woman just called her a mistake Jung Eun Gyo had made. He had found a new woman while Yumi was still clueless. Yumi nervously thanked her for her concern. Young didn't stop there, asking if she really intended to keep this baby and give birth to it. She feigned concern, saying she was just worried since they weren't even married and she was already pregnant. She said she could imagine the rumors. Nasty ones would spread, to which Yumi coldly replied, "Does the order of things really matter that much? The outcome is the same anyway," and Yumi thanked her for her concern in this day and age. What's so surprising about getting pregnant before marriage? Suddenly, Song Ha-yang gave Yumi a strange look and asked, "Is it really the director's child?" She glared at her, asking in horror, "What are you talking about?" Young replied that she knew the director well, and he's not the type of man to make mistakes or carelessly get involved with women. Choi Yumi fumed. Unbelievably, this woman had just called her a mistake that Jung Eun Gyo made. Suddenly, she said she wanted to pick a birthday gift for the chairman and asked for Choi Yumi's help. Saying she heard Yumi had a refined fashion sense before Yumi could even reply, she walked out the door saying she'd contact her later. Choi Yumi stood there, a bad feeling rising inside her. That evening, after the cafe closed, she saw many missed calls from her mother. She wanted to meet her in person to explain everything, filled with anxiety. She knew her family would be furious. Suddenly, she recalled her morning conversation with Dung. He had told her if she felt unwell, to call him immediately, and he would come right away. But Yumi couldn't understand why he was suddenly so concerned about her. Could he really be that eager to be a father? That much? Just as she was about to call him, her phone rang with an incoming call from him. He asked where she was and how she felt. She replied that she had just finished work and would go home soon to explain things to her mom. Before she could say another word, the cafe door flew open and her furious mother stormed in. Before Choi Yumi could even say hello, a stinging slap landed across her face. Her cheek burned as tears instantly streamed down. A worried voice from the phone called her name, asking what was going on. Jung Eun Gyo clearly heard the impact in the scream. from the other end. He repeatedly called her name but got no response. He immediately ordered his driver to drive to the cafe as fast as possible. The woman yelled at her daughter that she must have lost her mind. She said she had purposely introduced her to the hospital director's son so she wouldn't have to bring home a gangster's son as a son-in-law. Yumi held her burning cheek and wearily asked why her mother always forced her. "If you can't even go against Dad, why do you force me to?" She said she had always been obedient and going to the arranged meetings, but she was still constantly nagged. The woman screamed again, asking if she thought it was a good idea to love a man like that. Then Yumi looked her mother straight in the eye and said loudly that to her it made no difference if he was a doctor or a gangster. She asked if her mother had ever once cared about her opinion. The furious mother grabbed her arm, pulling her to the door, saying they were going to the hospital right now to get rid of the baby. Yumi began to struggle, screaming that even if she went, she would not marry the hospital director's son. Suddenly, she lost her balance. Thud, she fell to the floor, hitting a chair hard. The woman showed no pity or concern for her daughter. She called Yumi a disappointment and not her daughter. Leaning down, she angrily asked if she intended to marry that man. She continued to call her ungrateful, asking if she had any pity for her mother. Just then, Choi Yumi clutched her stomach in pain, struggling to breathe. She felt extremely unwell. Suddenly, the door chimed again, signaling someone was entering the cafe. Jung Eun Gyo rushed to her side, gently asking if she was okay. But Yumi looked up at him, completely stunned. She couldn't believe he had rushed to her rescue. Without waiting for a reply, he gently scooped her up into his arms. Her mother stood nearby, staring dumbfounded at the scene. She began to mutter, "Isn't that the man?" Director Dung walked past her without even a glance, his mind consumed by a single thought to get Yumi out of there as quickly as possible. She pressed her cheek to his chest, a storm of conflicting emotions rising within her. She still couldn't believe he had rushed to be with her. She let out a soft groan, saying it hurt. He gently carried her to the car, holding her tightly and reassuring her everything would be okay. As he set her in the seat, he reached out to stroke her belly. Yumi asked, "Why did you come here?" Dung looked at her annoyed, saying, "You're pregnant. I heard you weren't well yet, here you are wandering around." She wearily rubbed her forehead. She said she wasn't feeling well after what he did to her last night. I mean, she's a human, not an animal. And this guy, injured with his stomach all bandaged up, is still going at it like a beast. Meanwhile, his wife is only 5 weeks pregnant. This guy is unbelievable, seriously. He placed one hand behind her back while the other continued to rub her belly. He said he didn't do anything and that she was this way because she liked it and nobody forced her. Hey, she told him to watch his words. But he just smirked, replying that she was the one who should be careful and be grateful that he tolerated her constant insolence. Yumi looked up and said she was scared. I have no idea what she's so scared of. Scared, and now your belly is huge? Oh, I'm so scared, so very scared. He smiled, joking that she had nothing to fear, because he hadn't taken any of her fingers yet. The way these gangsters talk is kind of funny, isn't it? Her expression grew thoughtful as she said she was truly grateful he came. She was too scared to even think about it. What would have happened if you weren't here? Before she could finish, he spoke coldly. He told her not to blame anyone but her parents. He wrapped his arms around her, saying her parents were the ones at fault for forcing her to meet him. He said someone like her shouldn't put herself down or feel like she's a sinner. Yumi couldn't believe what she was hearing. She never expected him to take her side like this. She lowered her head and leaned against his chest as if seeking refuge from the world. Director Dung looked at the small, fragile Yumi and thought how foolish she was. When she blamed herself, instead of her parents, there were times he wanted to shield her from all the world's injustices. He thought it must be painful to be too kind to blame anyone but yourself. Suddenly, she spoke softly. She asked him to help protect her and the baby. She said no one could do it but him. He asked, "So what do I get out of it?" She looked up at him in despair, asking if he was asking for a reward for protecting his own child. He looked at her, saying that to him a child is just an option, which he doesn't see in her. Looking like someone sincerely begging for help, she said she didn't know what to give a man who had everything. Dung replied that he wasn't worried about the baby, but about her he wanted to keep an eye on her for a while longer. He looked at her intently and said he wanted her by his side, that's all. Yumi was overjoyed. She asked if that was all she had to do to keep the baby safe. He looked at her, saying she knew very well he hated lies more than anything, so she must be responsible for her words, just like he is. More than anything, so she must be responsible for every word she says, just like him. After handing them the ultrasound photo, the elderly male doctor gave some advice, saying that in the first trimester, getting enough rest and avoiding stress are most important. Dung Hyung was tense, listening intently to the doctor and memorizing every word. They thanked the doctor and stood up, and he put his arm around Yumi's shoulder. The most important thing is to get enough rest and avoid stress. Dung Hyung was tense. Yumi was taken to a VIP room for an IV drip. A nurse politely instructed her to call if there was an emergency after making sure she was settled. The doctor praised him, saying he was a very caring husband, and finally the doctor smiled. He thought that despite being a busy man, he still made time for her. Her mother had been right, they weren't husband and wife, not even in love yet, they were about to have a baby. Yumi was taken to a VIP room for an IV drip, and a nurse politely told her to call if there was an emergency after making sure she was okay. Suddenly, her train of thought was interrupted when she saw the hospital director's son enter the room, cheerfully greeting her. She thought he was a really busy person but still made time for her. Her mother was right, they were not a married couple. He walked in, smiling brightly, saying he couldn't believe his eyes when he saw her name, so he decided to visit her. Smiling in response, Taeju was a bit shy. He said he thought she would call him sometime, but it turned out he was wrong. He looked at her worriedly and asked why she was hospitalized. Yumi, flustered, avoided his gaze and replied that she was pregnant. His mouth let out a surprised, "Huh," and he asked why. Yumi was probably too flustered to know how to explain. Since they had only recently been on a date, she gave a forced smile and said it was okay, that many people reacted the same way. She said she understood his reaction because it hadn't been long since they last met, and now she was in his hospital and he suddenly found out she was pregnant. She said she understood his reaction because it hadn't been long since they last met, and now she was at the hospital where he worked, and he suddenly found out she was pregnant. He confessed that a few days ago, he had stopped by her cafe to see her, but she was not there, so he had to leave. Taeju sighed in relief and said that he would come to her cafe as a customer then, if she did not mind. She was a little awkward, so she joked that it was a shame she could not drink with him anymore. Taeju sighed in relief, saying he would come to her cafe as a customer then, if she did not mind. But she was not there, so he had to leave. He planned to come back many times, but now he was not sure if he could. He clearly remembered seeing the two of them on a date. He did not like the idea of that guy hanging around her again. Taeju sighed in relief, saying, "Then I will come to your cafe as a customer, if you do not mind." Yumi smiled and replied that she was always happy to have him. He was about to say something more when the door suddenly burst open, and Eun Gyo walked in, looking at him with an unfriendly gaze. He clearly remembered seeing the two of them on a date. He did not like that guy hanging around her again. Seeing this, Taehu still greeted him cheerfully, but Eun Gyo said he had given orders that no one was allowed in the room. The doctor replied that he and she were friends, and he was just worried about her. But Director Eun Gyo was not pleased with this answer, and his eyes turned cold. His possessive instincts flared up. He looked at Yumi suspiciously and asked why she had said something different last time. Taeju and she were both startled even though they had done nothing wrong. She quickly said that it was time for the doctor to see other patients. He quickly took the chance to leave the room. Then, Eun Gyo sat down on the edge of the bed, looked at her threateningly, and said she had a bad habit of lying. She replied that she could not tell the truth in front of her father back then. He said it was strange that she was afraid of her father, but not of him. Even though he had once said he could eat her up, Yumi held her belly protectively, scolding him for saying such crude things in front of the baby. She told him to watch his language, but Jung Eun Gyo just laughed. She said there was a thing called prenatal education. Even if the baby was only the size of a peanut, it could still understand everything. He stared at her and continued to laugh, thinking she was so strange. Then, he gave her the ultrasound picture of their future child. Yumi was both moved and surprised. She happily took the picture, thanked him, and asked when he got it. He crossed his arms, looking smug and proud that he had thought of this. She thought he really did have a soft, warm side hidden away. Then she suddenly remembered the unpleasant incident with Song Hae-young and told him that the woman had come to the cafe looking for her. She said the woman acted strangely and wanted her to go shopping with her. Eun Gyo calmly nodded, saying he already knew about it and did not want her to worry. Yumi sadly lowered her head, thanking him for protecting her. Her whole life she had lived under her parents' control, doing as they said. But now she had to protect herself and be responsible for her child. She confessed that she used to think the director was a bad person, but it turned out he was better than she thought. Hearing this, he asked why she thought of him that way now. She replied sadly that at least he had never hit her. Eun Gyo asked why she was surprised by that. Had she been a victim of domestic violence? Seeing the change in her expression, he asked if her father had ever hit her. She was silent for a moment, then replied that in her world, power decides everything. The biggest lesson in her life was that nothing suppresses and subjugates people more effectively than force. Eun Gyo pondered for a moment, then said he thought she had a point. Suddenly, he raised his hand and placed it on her neck. Yumi trembled with fear, the thought that she was wrong about him flashing through her mind. Seeing her reaction, he confirmed his suspicion and told her not to be afraid, because if he wanted to, he would have already squeezed, and that he had no reason to hit her. Choi Yumi angrily slapped his hand away, sarcastically thanking him so very, very much. He suddenly asked if she was still interested in that guy, meaning the hospital director's son. She tried to explain that he just came to say hello, but Jung Eun Gyo scoffed at her naivety, asking what kind of doctor would abandon his patients to visit a woman, especially when that woman was pregnant with another man's child. His eyes flashed with anger and jealousy. He asked if she wanted him to kick that doctor out of the hospital, saying he could fire the director's son if he wanted to. The male lead is a real big shot, everyone. Just the thought of that guy daring to look at what belonged to him made his blood boil. He suddenly grabbed her hand and pulled her close. She saw a wicked look in his eyes and realized he was up to something. She said the doctor told her not to do anything strenuous, but he just smirked. "Don't worry, just do not get too excited." Although he lifted her onto his lap, she protested, saying this was ridiculous. They were in a hospital, yet he placed his hand on her waist, smiling when she said she knew what he was planning to do. Choi Yumi's face flushed red as she said she did not know. She just guessed that if they were this close, he was planning something naughty. She totally did not want it, but actually, she really wanted him to position her more comfortably. He told her to think whatever she wanted. She glared at him, but before she could react, he suddenly kissed her. They both stuck their tongues out to kiss, which looked quite amusing. But seriously, who sticks their tongue out like that right at the start of a kiss? It was strange. He did not understand why he was so jealous either. He just knew he was angry with her about it.